This guy isn't quite human. He's the last weapon humanity built before going extinct. Nanomachines in his blood, muscle fibers multiplied beyond limit, a body that can take a 30-meter monster's blow with both hands and shrug it off. He was made to win a war, and he lost. He lost his friends, lost his species, lost the entire planet. The last human alive died in his arms, thanking him for having been saved. So Jin steps into a capsule, deep in a bunker. He says his power might still be needed in the future. Kagura thinks that's a fairy tale, but Jin doesn't need certainty. A small chance is enough, and here's the chance. The corruptors only survive on a rotting planet, so all he had to do was wait for the Earth to heal. 5 years later, the corruptors still ruled everything. 20 years, and the land was still dead beneath the fog. 1,000 years, and the red mist still covered the planet. 5,000 years, and the landscape finally began to change. 8,000 years, and the Earth had regained all the beauty it had lost. Tens of thousands of years, and the monsters began to weaken with no pollution left to feed on. The beasts died out, the birds took flight again. Only monster skeletons remained, scattered on beaches, and time kept passing, until 1 billion years had gone by. A crowd of people with animal ears were running, but they were stunned by one thing. That ancient machine had cracked open, and what stepped out of it was Jin, with a perfect body. Looking into the compartment, Jin notes that his clothes are still stored exactly as Kagura had left them. In front of the monitors, the young man comments that that world is already 100 million years in the future. Looking at the corrupted data, Jin says it is impressive that the place has been preserved for so long. He then states that this happened thanks to the nanomachines scattered throughout the planet's atmosphere. Holding the message cube left by Kagura, Jin expresses his intention to understand the current situation. Turning to the group, the warrior decides to hear their story and apologizes for the situation. As the youths react, the young man justifies that, after all, he spent 100 million years without clothes there. Now dressed in his clothes, Jin adjusts his gloves and comments that the outfit seems ideal. Right after, the massive metal door of the building slowly opens, revealing the outside. Faced with the intense sunlight, everyone covers their eyes as they step out of that dark environment. Adjusting his vision, the warrior observes the surrounding landscape with a very attentive expression. Facing the vast green valley, Jin recognizes that this is the world 100 million years later. Noticing that the place has completely changed, the young girl pulls his clothes, calling him a guardian god. She then points to the path between the trees, telling everyone to follow her. Looking to where she indicated, Jin observes the group in silence before moving forward together. Pondering in silence, Jin wonders if they could be human, since humanity should already be extinct. The warrior wonders if they might be other creatures that evolved over the ages to resemble humans. He then deduces that this evolution likely occurred due to the direct influence of the nanomachines. Smiling, Jin states that the preserved language proves everything, and notes that he has not introduced himself yet. The young man formally introduces himself as Jin, while the young girl says her name is Hakama. Shortly after, the other two companions also introduce themselves, revealing their names to be Danpo and Shandy. As they move forward together, Jin asks what her goal is, and the young woman replies that they are almost there. Looking at him, Hakama openly asks the warrior to defeat the terrible corruptors of the world. Suddenly, Shandy stops completely trembling upon spotting a terrifying scene right before his eyes. In front of them, the group watches in horror as the village catches fire with heavy smoke rising into the sky. Desperate, Shandy runs screaming for his parents while Hakama tries in vain to stop him from rushing ahead. Watching the commotion in silence, Jin places his hand on his chin, calmly analyzing the area. The warrior notices wooden barricades completely in flames along the entrance of that destroyed village. Looking at the burning structures, he realizes that the buildings there were made of wood. Walking behind the youngsters, Jin concludes that this new civilization does not seem to be very advanced. Faced with the sudden attack, Hakama freezes completely upon seeing the terrible scene ahead. At that moment, the boy screams for his grandmother as he sees her bravely blocking the beast. Resisting the attack, the old woman recognizes Hakama and asks why she has returned. Watching the combat closely, Jin questions whether that creature is truly one of the terrible corruptors. Then, the warrior notices the exact resemblance and asks if they kept that name. Refusing to flee the place, Hakama steps forward, declaring she will save the old woman from that great danger. Moving quickly to the front, Jin declares that he needs to personally confirm that important matter. With a devastating strike, the warrior hits the monster head-on and sends it flying. Then, he carefully holds the old woman in his arms and politely asks to be excused. While retreating with the old woman in his arms, Jin encourages the girl to unleash her attack. Focusing her power, the young girl fires an energy sphere directly at the beast. The girl's energy attack collides head-on with the flames spewed by the creature. With the impact of the blow, the monster is struck with extreme violence right in the chest. Seeing the beast defeated, Jin observes that the nanomachines completely prevented cellular regeneration. Then, the young man wonders if she used nanomachines controllable only by compatible humans. Curious, Jin asks if everyone in this era shoots fire, but the old woman says that only a few can. Hearing about the divine power, he understands what they call the ability to control nanomachines. Running over, Hakama asks about the other villagers, and her grandmother replies that everyone was evacuated. Then, the old woman changes the subject and asks why the youngsters decided to come back. With a desolate look, the old woman laments, saying that the village is already completely destroyed. The old woman reveals that the creature fought just now was actually just a newborn larva. Given this, the old woman explains that the monster was still in its initial larva stage. She warns that the main body is uncontrollable, and soon several larvae will invade the place. Suddenly a man approaches and firmly tells the old woman not to falter now. Called Sarlis, the warrior asserts with conviction that he himself will destroy that kind of corruptor. When questioned about the villagers, the young man reassures them that he has already sent them to a safe shelter. Upon seeing Hakama, her relieved father asks in surprise where his young daughter had gone. The girl reveals she went to the sealed door, leaving the old woman shocked by the forbidden place. Then, Hakama explains she heard from her grandmother that the guardian god would come to help them. Looking at Jin, the old woman wonders in surprise if he could be that man. With a suspicious look, Sarlis comments that the young man does not look like a god at all. Laughing mockingly at that statement, the young man asks them not to joke about a serious matter. Upon being called an inferior species by Sarlis, Jin repeats the expression, unable to believe it. Running to his brother, the boy asserts that the visitor is the true guardian god. Pointing at his ears, Sarlis claims that the young man belongs to an inferior species. The warrior insists it was just a mistake, but the girl talks back, reminding him of the defeated monster. Laughing at the warning, Sarlis claims he could also defeat that larva with a single strike. With a serious expression, Jin demands that everyone pay attention to what he has to say. Holding his spear, Sarlis declares that this problem belongs to the village and rejects inferior outsiders. Turning his back, he tells the visitor not to meddle in matters that do not belong to him. When asked where he was going, Sarlis replies that he is going alone to destroy the great corruptor. Looking back, the young man tells everyone to stay in that place, just trembling in fear. Outraged by the decision, the old woman calls the young man a fool and says he should flee. Watching the young man leave, Jin remains completely silent, following that entire chaotic scene. Then, the old woman thanks him for the help and asks him to accompany the children to the shelter. In response, Hakama warns her grandmother that she will follow Sarlis and risk her own life there. Surprising the old woman, the warrior simply refuses the request to accompany the children to the shelter. With an excited smile, the young girl states that she also has her own pride. Walking ahead, Jin declares that he will not let anyone call him an inferior species and then die. Suddenly, a gigantic creature emerges from the waters, causing massive waves across the entire area. Meanwhile, Sarlis channels all his energy as he pushes firmly through the waters. Confronting the beast head-on, the young man draws the monster's attention to fight it. With his spear ready, the young man declares that he will carry that country and become a holy knight. Facing the giant enemy, he states that he will finish off an invader of that kind without hesitation. Leaping high toward the monster, Sarlis shouts that he himself will bring down the enemy. At that moment, a slimy appendage emerges from the monster as splashes of liquid fall into the water. Right after, several smaller larvae are expelled from the beast's body, falling into the water. With that, two small creatures violently leap at the warrior to launch a surprise attack. Without hesitation, Sarlis delivers a swift, precise strike and slashes both monsters in midair. Facing the large monster, the young man states that he will end the combat with a single strike. Charging forward rapidly at high speed, the young man shouts for the creature to take his attack. With a powerful move, Sarlis finishes his sentence as he lands a direct hit on the large monster. After the impact, the warrior smiles firmly, believing he has easily defeated the beast. However, the creature roars without taking any damage, forcing the young man to retreat, completely taken by surprise. Before the young man's eyes, the cut on the monster's face begins to regenerate rapidly. Looking back startled, Sarlis says in surprise that the beast's wounds are regenerating. Giving no time to react, the enormous monster advances its paw toward the young man. Raising his arm to protect himself, the young man gets quite confused, not understanding a thing. With complete composure, Jin blocks the attack and asks if he feels better. Seeing that incredible defense, Sarlis stammers, unable to believe what he is seeing. Next, the warrior throws the colossal creature backward with a single swift movement. Watching the fallen monster, Jin wonders in awe if that creature was still alive right there. Right after, the warrior prepares another grand move by firmly snapping his fingers. With that simple gesture, he fires a devastating beam that completely pierces the enormous beast. Faced with that explosion, Sarlis is startled while the villagers arrive shouting for their leader. Running quite hurriedly down the path, the village people call out the young man's name loudly. Upon reaching the location, the elderly woman and the villager freeze completely in shock. Not understanding the scene, the old woman wonders in fear what just happened. With that, she notices that the warrior held that giant body using only one hand. With his arm raised, Jin comments that it is getting heavy and suggests they head back now. Next, the warrior firmly grabs the young man to quickly get him away from that dangerous place. Carrying the other young man in his arms, he takes a giant leap over the rough waters. Right after, the two land on solid ground while water splashes around them. Still on the ground, Sarlis looks up and asks who he really was at that moment. Looking at the monster, Jin explains that these creatures regenerate right after taking damage. He then adds that nanomachines are needed to stop this constant cellular regeneration. Confused, the young man repeats the word nanomachines, and Jin replies that it is the so-called divine power. The warrior praises the previous attack, but notes that the wound was not deep enough. Impressed, the young man asks if he is a guardian god, but Jin denies being a deity. Walking ahead, the warrior states that there is still something he would like to say. Looking back, Jin asks if that was the village's problem, receiving a confirmation. As the young man tries to explain himself while shouting, Jin interrupts him, saying that is wrong. Looking at the enormous beast, the warrior declares that problem is actually his. Faced with the declaration, the giant creature roars loudly while violently swinging its tentacles. Faced with the attack, the warrior swiftly dodges the tentacles, cutting through the air. Observing the beast, Jin seriously states that his first task will be to immobilize the enemy. Then, the young man delivers a swift strike, immobilizing one of the enormous beast's tentacles. With that, the massive monster's body is completely trapped and frozen in the middle of the water. Seeing that, Sarlis comments in surprise that such monsters were born out of humanity's foolishness. Clenching his fist with energy, the young man continues speaking to the other warrior. With that, Jin explains that because he also lived on that planet 100 million years ago, focusing energy into his hand, he declares that he is solely responsible for resolving everything. Not understanding the explanation, Sarlis asks if he can do it, and the warrior confirms he can. Then he claims to be the direct result of countless and unimaginable repetitions from the past. The young man continues, remembering the brutal and tragic history endured by humanity's ancient soldiers. Recalling the scientists in the laboratory, Jin adds that it was a story stained with blood. With a fixed gaze, the warrior declares that he is the last human created from that era. Then he fires a powerful beam while forcefully declaring his ultimate goal. Struck by the devastating attack, the giant creature roars in surprise before being utterly destroyed. With that, the beam of energy completely devastates the monster's body in a single instant. Then, the impact of the light causes the water to surge as the beast vanishes completely. Faced with that display, the village residents watch the scene, utterly speechless. With glowing eyes, Hakama clasps her hands, smiling at the great warrior's impressive victory. Meanwhile, the beam of energy pierces through the planet's atmosphere and reaches outer space. Then, the sky clears up again over the calm waters where only smoke remains. Still collapsed on the ground, Sarlis shouts loudly at the sheer force of that truly devastating attack. Dusting off his hands, Jin declares himself to be the ultimate weapon created by humanity. Looking down at the fallen young man, the warrior finishes his thought, stating he is a scientific weapon. Suddenly, Jin looks toward the beach upon hearing a noise coming from the nearby woods. Hidden in the vegetation, the girl says she came to investigate the intruders near Kodama village. Looking through her lens, the stranger states she just witnessed something completely unbelievable. Watching the group, the young woman ponders that not even the captain of the Holy Knights could do that. With her glasses glinting, the girl adds that this is something completely out of the ordinary. Getting up quite excitedly, the girl declares she must return to the royal capital immediately. In the recording, Kagura's image tells Jin that he probably won't be alive anymore. Then the scientist smiles in the recording and comments that he always wanted to say that dramatic line. Looking at the landscape, Kagura asks about the future and states that the environment must have improved. However, he warns that a problem has arisen, and decides to get straight to the point. The scientist explains that, even with the planet's improvement, the corruptors wouldn't be completely extinct. Faced with this revelation, Jin remains silent while continuing to listen to the message very attentively. In the recording, Kagura says he started to notice something wrong 1,000 years after going to sleep. The scientist reveals that he also went into deep sleep periodically to observe the changes in the world. The report indicates that the number of monsters steadily decreased as the environment improved. However, the images revealed a dangerous anomaly emerging at a specific point on that vast planet. A new threat appears on the screen, showing a humanoid creature beside a defeated prey. The monster displays terrifying power while showcasing an appearance much more evolved than the others. Kagura explains that, alongside the changes in the planet, creatures emerged that began to evolve. The scientist warns that these new mutations would certainly become a great threat to everyone. With that, he reveals he altered the new beings so they could fight against the monsters. Next, Kagura adds in the recording that he left a bit of power reserved for him. Upon hearing this revelation in the recording, Jin asks what kind of power that would be. Showing the syringe filled with green liquid, the young man asks if that was what he meant. In the message, the scientist explains that the nanomachines will show how to use it as soon as it's injected. Kagura reveals that this exclusive power works only on him due to full compatibility with the modifications. Right after, Jin silently observes his own hands while feeling the product's effect. At that instant, a sharp blade begins to form directly from his hand. Holding the blade, the young man comments that creating objects by altering nanomachines is very practical. In the projection, Kagura reveals he hid other upgrades in laboratories scattered all across the planet. The map shows that the locations were divided to prevent total destruction by the monsters. Furthermore, the scientist adds in the message that he wished for him to travel and see the world. Meanwhile, in the distant future, knights ride forward on their horses near the great waterfall. However, one of the knights watches the horizon while continuing on his path in silence. At the same time, someone runs quickly through the dense vegetation of that local forest. Catching her breath, the girl smiles and comments that things must be much better now. Meanwhile, a beautiful city appears, displaying its ancient buildings and peaceful surrounding canals. Inside the library, a very elegant young woman reads a large book by candlelight. Back to the message, Kagura tells his friend to truly enjoy that new world ahead. Then, the scientist laments that he himself won't be able to witness the entire future. Even so, the scientist Kagura smiles and asks his companion to see everything through to the end. As the hologram disappears, Jin watches the projection, maintaining a completely serious and focused expression. In the final line, the recording declares that it is leaving the responsibility of the world to him. Holding the cube, the young man replies that he understands, while the children run over calling out to him. As they approach, the youths explain that they finally found him and that everyone was looking for him. Tugging at his clothes, Hakama asks them to return soon, as the event depends entirely on him. Looking down, the warrior notices something surprising and eye-catching around the young girl's neck. Looking closely, Jin wonders if that necklace could be a laboratory key. Holding her shoulder, the young man asks where she got the pendant, and Hakama asks in surprise. The girl explains that a great person entrusted the object as a generational amulet. Understanding the revelation, Jin finally realizes how the young girl managed to enter that ancient place. Being pulled by the children, the young man admits he now owes them a huge favor. Right after, everyone arrives at the village lit by a large festive bonfire in the center. Around the flames, the residents excitedly call out to the others to hurry up. In front of the group, the surprised inhabitants ask if that young man could be the real guardian god. Even under their gazes, one resident comments in disbelief that Jin looks like he belongs to a lower species. Next, another young man doubtfully questions if that frail youth really defeated the great monster. Hearing the argument, the warrior turns around in silence to watch the commotion behind him. Irritated by the doubts, the leader shouts, reminding them that everyone fled and saw nothing. Seeing the change in attitude, Jin smiles and notes that the people seem completely different now. At that moment, the old woman approaches, saying she finally managed to find the young man there. Then, the old lady once again expresses her deep gratitude on behalf of the entire village. The man adds that the village would have been destroyed and states he wants to repay that debt. With a peaceful smile, Jin calmly replies for them not to worry about it. The warrior adds that, if they insist, He prefers to receive information instead of material goods. Surprised, the man asks in alarm after Jin requests details about the current situation of that world. Hearing this, the old woman suggests that the best path for him would be to go to the royal capital. The old lady explains that the king lives in Kermosia, along with people from all over gathering information. She adds that the people of Kodama usually go there to sell silk fabrics. Although the long journey is quite dangerous, the woman considers that Jin will be completely fine. Next, the old woman suggests taking Hakama as a guide, since the girl has business there as well. The old lady reveals that there is a great academy in the capital dedicated to enhancing this divine power. The next morning, the sun illuminates the peaceful village surrounded by mountains and calm rivers. Stretching at the window, Jin remarks on how pleasant and pure that morning was. Taking in the beautiful scenery, the warrior states that he never imagined witnessing such an incredible sight. Looking out at the horizon, the young man laments that he cannot show that view to Kagura. At that moment, the boy arrives bringing a stack of folded clothes for the great warrior. Then the young man politely asks him to put on the clothes brought for the journey. Soon after, Jin walks through the village wearing his new clothes and holding his large backpack. In front of the group, the old woman reminds the young girl that she needs to fulfill her role as a guide. Crossing his arms, Starless complains that he would have liked to learn from the warrior along that path. Approaching him, Jin praises the young man's performance, saying his skills were very good. Quite excited by the praise, the young warrior shouts that he will be waiting for everyone in the capital. While the young man promises to study, the villager asks the savior to take good care of Hakama. Kneeling in front of the girl, the man asks her to take care of her health. Then, all the villagers wave cheerfully, saying goodbye to the departing duo. And so, Jin and the young girl begin their long walk toward their new destination together. The two keep walking side by side along the marked trail by the beautiful river. Reaching a large waterfall, the girl crouches down to rest for a bit. Pointing to the path ahead, Hakama indicates the right direction they should follow. Settling by the campfire, the warrior asks how far it is to the capital. The young girl replies that they will walk 4 more days, and Jin comments that he thinks the journey is short. Next, the girl asks why the savior wants to know about the world. Faced with the question, Jin replies that it is a secret, and the girl merely repeats his answer. The young man remembers Kagura's words claiming that monsters would never be extinct. Taking in the scene, Jin confirms that the fearsome corruptors really continue to exist in this new era. Originally, these monsters were only supposed to breed in severely polluted environments, but that place was clean. Observing the glow around him, the young man realizes that something on Earth is changing. Seeing him looking serious, Hakama says he makes a scary face, and Jin apologizes. He points out that at least there are people living in this era without being dominated by monsters. Next, the young man decides to first investigate how humans fight against these fearsome threats. Finally, Jin asks the girl to stop calling him a god and to just use his name. Suddenly, the sound of horse hooves echoes from the darkness of the nearby path. Hearing the sudden noise, Jin and the young girl turn toward the darkness. Then, the knight who emerged apologizes for interrupting their moment of rest. Mounted on his horse, the man politely asks if he can speak with both of them for a moment. With a serene gaze, the knight silently observes the campsite while awaiting permission. Facing the visitor directly, Jin asks the man straight out about his identity. The captain of the 7th Division of the Holy Knights officially introduces himself as Argus Walton. Upon hearing about the Holy Order, Jin repeats it in surprise while Hakama asks if it was them. Confronted with the warrior's stance, the captain's subordinate grits her teeth, showing great irritation. Shouting from atop her horse, the subordinate demands that the young man stand up to speak. Dismounting from his horse, Argus tells Karina to stop while she insists on her suspicion about them. Now on the ground, the captain apologizes for speaking while mounted and invites them both to talk. Rising from the campfire, Jin questions his previous statement, while Argus acknowledges his rudeness. Next, the knight asks the young man to answer where they came from and where they are going. Without hesitating, Hakama replies that they came from Kodama village heading to the capital, surprising the captain. With a malicious smile, the female guardian shows absolute certainty about those people's origins. Leaping off her horse, Karina states with conviction that they were exactly who she was looking for. Then the subordinate shouts, accusing them because there are no inferior species registered in Kodama village. Hearing that, Jin considers that the country was quite organized for keeping population records. However, Argus denies his companion's accusation, leaving the subordinate quite confused by his response. The captain explains that the girl's clothes are valuable fabrics produced in the village itself. The knight adds that children's clothes made of that fabric are rare, confirming the young girl's story. Despite that, Argus rests his hand on his sword and warns that there is still a catch. Wielding his sword toward the young man, the captain declares that he is clearly different. Observing his attire, Argus questions where those clothes, completely unknown to all of them, could have come from. Showing no fear of the blade, Jin listens to the man report bandit attacks involving children. Pointing his weapon, Argus accuses the young man of feigning harmlessness to commit crimes with her. While the girl desperately denies the accusations, the knight states that they will judge the case. Biting her teeth in frustration, Hakama tries to contain her anger at that unjust accusation. Without hesitating, the young girl concentrates her divine power in her hand to defend her companion. Noticing the young girl's reaction, Argus keeps his gaze entirely fixed and attentive. Seeing the energy emerging, the knight orders her not to try anything foolish there. In shock, Karina is surprised, thinking the young man possesses quite promising power. Observing the whole situation calmly, Jin concludes that those were the so-called holy knights. Analyzing the situation, Argus silently admits that the two of them are truly very strong. Pointing his blade, the captain orders the young man to answer where he came from to decide his fate. With the tip of his sword at his face, Argus threatens to cut him down right there without hesitation. Faced with that threat, Jin merely observes the knight, maintaining a moment of total and absolute silence. With his sword pointed at the young man, Argus demands to know where he really came from. Then, the knight firmly states that he will cut him down right there without any hesitation. Facing the blade at his neck, Jin merely watches the man without showing any reaction. As the tension rises, the young man remains completely silent, maintaining that serious look. Noticing the young man's immense calm, Argus hesitates for a moment, showing great surprise. Unfazed by the threat, Jin finally answers calmly that he came from Kadama village. Upon hearing the answer, the guardian screams in disbelief, unable to accept such a simple revelation. Next, the captain sheathes his sword, saying he understands, which leaves his guardian quite confused. Looking at the young girl, Argus directly asks if she isn't lying to him. The girl then confirms and asks if the young man is the guardian god of the village. Surprised by the question, the knight repeats the phrase guardian god before understanding everything. Approaching the group, Jin asks if they finished their conversation, receiving his confirmation. Already mounted on his horse, Argus apologizes for his rudeness, causing his guardian to complain bitterly. The knight asks if they are going to the capital and concludes that they will meet again. Finally, Argus says goodbye, offering help if they need it, which leaves his companion outraged. With that, Argus bids farewell, announcing he is leaving his companion completely shocked by it. While the young man watches everything in silence, the guardian keeps desperately screaming for her captain. Riding down the road, the guardian questions him, unable to understand why he backed down there. Next, Karina insists, stating that the young man from an inferior species was clearly very suspicious. Keeping his eyes fixed ahead, Argus merely murmurs to himself about that inferior species business. Right after, the knight ponders which of them was truly the real inferior species. Upon hearing this, the other companion agrees, leaving the guardian even more stunned by everything. Looking back, the female knight asks if the young girl hadn't noticed what happened. The woman explains that the difference in power between them and that young man was gigantic. Resuming his speech, Argus reveals that he tried to attack him 3 times during that brief encounter. In that brief instant, the captain gripped the hilt of his sword tightly to unleash the attack. However, the other young man had already moved his hand inside his coat to react. The man finishes by explaining that he was subdued before he could even attempt any kind of move. Upon hearing the story, the female warrior asks if the captain used his own divine power. Faced with that confirmation, the captain continues riding in silence while the fog covers the path. Terrified, the guardian realizes in shock that her own power wasn't even activated. She explains that she tried to attack him as she did with the girl, but the spirits didn't help. Upon hearing the other companion confirm the same, Karina asks in astonishment what that truly meant. The captain explains that there is a gigantic difference in base divine power between the two of them. Argus adds that, in the entire Holy Order, only the Grand Captain could reach such a level. Faced with that revelation, the Guardian shows great frustration as she rides swiftly down the road. Lowering her head in silence, Karina admits she hadn't even noticed that massive difference. To ease the mood, Argus points out that the young man was an anomaly and recalls his recent arrival. When questioned about the incident in Kodama village, the leader confirms it was likely the young man. When the girl questions the danger of letting him free, Argus replies that they should simply watch him closely. Next, the captain declares that they need to return immediately to the capital without wasting time. Riding ahead, Argus silently reflects on the story of the village's guardian god. As he observes the great capital, the leader ponders the possibility of the young man becoming an ally. Looking at the horizon, Argus concludes that the young man will help with the kingdom's major troubles. As he walks alongside the young girl, Jin mentions that he met someone quite interesting yesterday. Curious, Hakama asks if all the knights from the royal capital are at that same incredible level. In response, Jin explains that only the true elite are gathered among the holy knights. The girl highlights the speed of his spirit magic, causing the young man to question her in surprise. Hakama details that divine power comes from the spirits and magic is born from this force. With that, Jin understands that the nanomachines scattered across the planet are treated as these so-called spirits. Watching the young girl walk, the warrior silently reflects that science has turned into fantasy in this era. The young man remembers the moment he was contemptuously called an inferior species. Looking back, Jin mentions the term inferior species again while the young girl listens. Next, the young man notes that there are many different species living in that same era. Hakama explains that some people have fish-like appearances and others resemble insects. The girl shares that her grandmother used to say places to live were limited in the past. She adds that everyone changed their bodies to adapt to the regions where they lived. Upon hearing the explanation, Jin wonders if such changes might be adaptations to the environment. The warrior ponders if some humans survived in the past and ended up evolving over the ages. The girl asks if those who didn't change are called inferior species, receiving confirmation. Furthermore, Hakama explains that the world's view on inferior species is quite cold. She then adds that many are enslaved, leaving the warrior surprised by that reality. However, the girl points out that she thinks it's wrong to treat someone differently just because of their physical appearance. Hearing this sincere opinion, Jin firmly states that all those people have gone crazy. Looking affectionately at his companion, the young man comments with a smile that she is a good person. Suddenly, a severely weakened young man comes limping down the road right in front of the two of them. Spotted the two travelers on the trail, the mysterious figure reaches out his hand asking for help. Unable to stay on his feet, the person begs for help before falling unconscious. Hurrying over to the body lying on the ground, Hakama anxiously asks if the person is okay. Meanwhile, Jin approaches the young man on the ground and notices something unexpected on his face. Badly bruised from the harsh walk, the stranger remains lying on the ground, breathing with extreme difficulty. Looking closely up front, the warrior notices the young man's human ears and understands the situation. Badly injured, the young man remains stretched out on the ground while struggling to catch his breath. Observing the injured boy, Jin comments that his body is covered in bruises and severe wounds. Worried about the young man's condition, Hakama asks if he is feeling all right there. Then the warrior tells the injured boy to hang in there, as he will take care of him now. Suddenly, the injured youth opens his eye with an alert look upon hearing him. At that moment, a desperate voice screams, firmly ordering everyone not to make a move. Threatening the girl with a blade, the young man warns that he will kill her if they advance. Facing the sudden danger, Jin remains standing at a distance while carefully observing the situation. Observing the boy, the warrior merely whispers to himself that he finally understands the situation. Holding the girl tightly, the youth retorts by asking if that was not a perfect trap. Hearing the statement, Jin silently deduces that their other allies must be very close. Suddenly, a cloaked figure appears, saying it is impressive that someone could pull off such a plan. Revealing himself completely, the bearded man praises the boy, calling him by his name, Poful. Accompanied by his henchman, the man states that the boy did exactly what he was ordered to do. The narration explains that this nanomachine function captures images to render a person completely transparent. Surrounding the young man, the bandit leader asks what country such a well-dressed inferior species could have come from. With the blade at his neck, the intruder calmly warns the young man not to try making any moves. Seeing the situation, Hakama cries out for Jin while the villain reminds them of the danger of reacting. While the boy complains angrily, the hostage girl begins to manifest her own divine power. Seeing the girl react like that, Jin immediately shouts his companion's name. Hearing that shout, the girl hesitates in fear while remaining held hostage by the young man in front of her. Calmly, Jin states that such power should not be pointed at innocent people. Surprised by the advice, young Hakama tries to argue, not knowing exactly how to act. Excited by the find, the bandit leader celebrates, saying he hit the jackpot. Next, his accomplice asks if Jin can also use that same divine power in battle. Without waiting for any answer, the muscular man lands a violent kick on the warrior's stomach. During the attack, the mercenary shouts at the inferior species not to act so arrogant. Intervening in the assault, the leader warns him not to ruin merchandise that was already worth little. While the accomplice mentions the young man's divine power, the boss flatly denies that possibility. Terrified by the revelation, Hakama realizes that those men were dangerous slave traders. Then, the leader tells the young girl to get some sleep while showing his complete annoyance. In shock, the girl silently realizes she will end up being sold like any common slave. Sometime later, Jin calls out to the girl in the cell, and she asks in surprise if it is him. Waking up startled inside the metal cell, the young girl looks around confused. Observing the girl, Jin asks how she is doing, and she replies that she is all right. Looking at the prison surroundings, the warrior asks aloud where they really are. Then, the young man explains that this place is the base of the mercenaries who attacked them. Looking at the surrounding cells, he adds that other captives are also gathered there. Because of this, the other prisoners remain huddled in the corners with visible marks of abuse. Meanwhile, another young prisoner trembles in fear in the corner of her own cell. Noticing his posture, the girl continues staring at Jin in total surprise, saying nothing. When asked about his clothes, the young man answers that they took them because they were rare. The young girl comments on his extreme calmness, and Jin explains that he has been this way his whole life. Quickly changing the subject, Hakama curiously asks why he did not resist back there. The girl adds that Jin could have easily defeated them, but the young man simply remains silent. Suddenly, the prison door opens, and the young boy enters bringing food. Noticing his presence, Jin turns around while Hakama watches the boy approach. Seeing both prisoners already awake, the boy comments that they had both just woken up. Gripping the bars, Hakama shouts at him while the youth asks to be hated for what he did. Then, the boy adds that he never expected to receive forgiveness from anyone for this. Facing those words, the young girl grips the cell bars, unable to say anything. Observing the young traitor in silence, Jin states that the boy is actually kind-hearted. Hearing that unexpected comment, the boy questions the statement and begins to define what a villain is. The warrior explains that real villains do not waste time thinking about forgiveness or hatred. With that, Jin slowly gets up inside the cell and decides to change the course of the conversation. Next, the warrior grabs the thick metal bars with his hands and bends them. Witnessing that display of strength, the young boy backs away, his eyes wide in shock. Stepping out of the destroyed cell, Jin reveals that he was merely waiting for the boy to appear. The warrior adds that now they can speak freely without anyone else overhearing. Then, Jin directly asks where the person who is important to him is being held prisoner. With a surprised look, the boy asks how he knew about that, and Jin replies that he simply guessed. Next, the warrior explains that he was also fooled at first because the wounds were real. The young man adds that not even villains would injure an ally like that, which is why he realized the truth quickly. Because of this, Jin states that he only obeyed them because the mercenaries had something to blackmail him with. Hearing those accurate words, the boy merely hesitates while silently holding back his emotions. With his head down, the youth tearfully reveals that his brother was captured by them. The boy says that the villains threatened to sell his beloved brother to the traitors. Then, Poful desperately adds that they would be separated forever if he did nothing. Crying heavily, the youth confides that they killed his parents, and he needs to protect his brother. Listening to the boy's whole story, Hakama watches the scene in complete and absolute silence. The warrior becomes deeply enraged and mutters to himself, calling the mercenaries scum. Hakama asks if he let himself be captured to save her, and Jin confirms, but adds something else. Smiling, the warrior comments that villains are very stubborn and are like oil stains. The young man adds that if one escapes, he will spread his influence and cause trouble elsewhere. While the guard at the door hears a noise, Jin concludes that he needs to destroy them all completely. With a devastating kick, the warrior sends the guard flying along with the wooden door. As the smoke clears, Jin steps through the doorway while the defeated guard remains on the ground. Holding onto the stone wall, the young man declares that he needs to root out that evil completely. The narration recalls the city filled with lights in the era from 100 million years ago. Back then, the young Jin observed the place in silence before continuing on his way. Watching the television, the young man remembers that in the beginning, he also wished to pursue true justice. Next, he remains standing on the dark street while vehicles pass around him. However, young Jin soon realized the harsh reality of that world he lived in. Looking to the side, the young man concluded that a world in need of justice existed. Then, Jin noticed that that entire world was completely full of deeply despicable people. As he is grabbed by the man, he thinks that living a normal life would be an excellent thing. However, young Jin recognizes that the hostile environment around him did not allow that. Faced with the aggression, the boy grabs the man's wrist and easily breaks it. With that, he advances against the criminals, declaring that he would destroy all those men. Without giving any reaction time, Jin grabs another man by the neck during the fight. Continuing the combat, the young man overpowers another powerful criminal amidst the great chaos. Sitting atop the pile of defeated bodies, Jin states that he kept eliminating all enemies, until one day, a person approached the place and made an important revelation. Listening attentively to the scientist, Jin listens in silence to what the man had to say to him. Reaching out his hand, Kagura states that the boy was born in entirely the wrong world for him. Back to the present, the young warrior advances impressively, dragging one of the unconscious guards across the floor. Upon seeing the intruder, the panicked guards order him to stop advancing there immediately. Lying on the floor, the defeated enemy desperately asks what the warrior's true objective there was. Leaning against the wall, the other mercenary fearfully asks where young Jin had managed to enter from. Faced with the enemy's panic, the young man merely smiles with total confidence without saying anything. Without hesitation, the warrior rushes forward super fast and throws another guard through the air with great ease. Seeing his companion fall defeated, the other guard retreats completely terrified by that immense strength. Next, Jin moves at high speed to attack the next enemy who tried to resist. Paralyzed before such violence, the mercenary watches the entire scene without being able to show any reaction. Slammed against the wall, the guard screams desperately, asking who he really was after all. Receiving no answer, the man simply collapses in fear, while young Jin remains standing. With that, the desperate screams of the defeated guards echo loudly throughout the entire facility. Hearing all that racket, Hakama and the other prisoners watch everything shocked, understanding nothing. Hearing the noise coming from outside, the girl comments, recognizing that very loud scream. Faced with the noise, the female prisoner asks who the companion is, and Hakama answers that he is a god. Looking at her companion, the young woman reassures her that if they leave everything to Jin, everything will be fine. Next, the girl tells everyone to leave, while the other asks if they will really be saved. Watching the prisoners leave, the young woman warns that the enemy leader possesses an extremely strong divine power. Meanwhile, the leader of the mercenaries retreats on the ground and asks the warrior to wait a moment. Holding another enemy by the head, Jin hears the villain ask if he wants money. Next, the man continues stammering incessantly and tries to offer something else to the young man. Pointing to the nearby cells, the fellow asks if his intention is to take slaves. Faced with this, the leader of the bandits states that he will hand over anyone he likes. Hearing that absurd proposal, Jin merely observes the man, maintaining a moment of absolute silence. Dropping the unconscious guard on the floor, the warrior asks if he has finished talking. With his eyes wide open, the fellow asks himself, not understanding what is happening there. Before him, the villain questions without understanding why his magic is not working. Observing the figure in front of him, the leader asks himself if the problem is that young man. Approaching the fallen man, Jin remarks that it helps that the fellow is merely a mediocre villain. Next, the warrior explains that real villains usually flee the place immediately. Looking down, Jin adds that types like him first look down on their opponents, thinking they will win. With that, the young man points out that villains like that try to flatter when they are about to lose. Faced with this, the criminal runs to the wall, stating that he has no other option left. Pulling the lever forcefully, the fellow screams that it is not all over yet. With that movement, the huge iron gate begins to rise, revealing a dark chamber. Trapped inside that enclosed compartment, a gigantic horned creature emerges, emitting a dark energy. Looking back, Jin hears the villain state that he ordered the monster for someone. As the monster advances, destroying the floor, the criminal states there was no other way. Laughing mockingly, the fellow adds that he will destroy the young man in a truly grand manner. Faced with the roaring creature, the man screams, promising to wipe out the young man once and for all. At that exact moment, the huge beast raises its arm and delivers a violent attack. Following the movement with his eyes, Jin observes the approach of that direct strike against him. Without wavering, the warrior steps forward and blocks the devastating attack using only his hands. Faced with that unbelievable defense, the villain's eyes widen, not understanding anything he sees. Holding the beast easily, Jin explains that he was born with a body much stronger than normal. Next, the warrior adds that his muscle fibers are far more numerous than a human's. With his fist raised, the young man calmly states that he will resolve that problem at that very instant. Charging at the creature, Jin declares that he will not hold back against such a dangerous intruder. Firing a devastating beam of light, the young man warns that he will use all of his divine power. Lying on the floor from the monster's destruction, the villain curses in terror at such immense force. Looking down from above, Jin questions if the man cannot even use divine power. With a cold, distant look, the warrior asks the criminal what he will do next. Trembling in terror before the warrior, the fellow desperately begs for a little mercy. Clasping his hands to plead, the man asks if he will not let him leave. Delivering a direct blow to the villain's face, Jin coldly replies that he will not. Adjusting his jacket, Jin calmly states that everything is ready to proceed. Looking at his own outfit, the young man comments that he finally managed to recover all his clothes. Turning to the cell, the young man apologizes to the prisoners and tells them to wait a little longer. Then, the warrior promises the young people that he will definitely get everyone out of there later. Walking over to the desk, Jin states that first he needs to investigate evidence of the mercenary's crimes. Upon opening the desk drawer, the young man murmurs in surprise as he notices something inside. Reading the papers he found, Jin attentively comments that it seemed quite suspicious. On the sheets of paper, several ancient and strange symbols appear, written in a completely indecipherable way. Observing that intriguing text, Jin just gives a small smile and says he understands it all. However, the young man soon confusedly admits that he has no idea what is written. Stepping away from the desk, Jin ponders that he will need to ask Hakama to teach him how to read those symbols. Squatting near the remains, the young man wonders what they intended by capturing that intruder. Touching the ground with his energized glove, Jin declares that he will discover the whole truth now. Thus, several virtual screens appear as the warrior accesses the nanomachines scattered throughout that area. Analyzing the projected data, Jin explains that there must be records saved during the past week. As he watches the projected recording, Jin notices something quite unexpected appearing before his eyes. During the recording, the mercenary asks the exact reason for capturing such a dangerous creature. Smiling maliciously, the mysterious figure replies that he will reveal only a single detail about it. Then, the man mockingly states that something quite interesting will happen in that country soon. Absorbing this important revelation, the warrior closes the projection while maintaining a completely serious posture. Shortly after, everyone finally arrives at a bustling and beautiful city under the radiant sun. On the main street, several residents silently watch the local guards arresting the mercenaries. While following the busy scene, Hakama and the girl watch the criminals being taken into custody. Suddenly, the young girl's eyes widen in surprise as she spots someone running toward her. Running along the path with great enthusiasm, the little boy shouts joyfully for his sister. Reunited with her younger brother, the young girl quickly runs to greet him with open arms. Wrapping the boy in a tight hug, the girl expresses her gratitude seeing that he is all right. With the boy by her side, the young girl thanks them deeply while Jin asks them not to worry. Glancing sideways at the guards in the street, the young man asks the girl another question. Watching the arrests, Jin asks about the origin of the guards and learns that they belong to the local guild. Then, the girl points to a horned man, explaining that he is the guild master. Upon overhearing the conversation, the horned man immediately turns around to look at the young man. Approaching them, the master asks if he was responsible for defeating the bandits, and Jin confirms it. Bowing respectfully, Padrak introduces himself as the guild master and thanks him for his assistance. Seeing this, the guild leader observes the warrior closely as he reflects on his strength. In silence, the man ponders that the youth doesn't have a single scratch after facing so many opponents. Padrak then states that there were constant extermination requests for that group of bandits. Upon hearing this, Jin asks if the local lord shouldn't be commanding the arrest of the criminals. The master then replies that only guild staff loyal to the king handle crimes. He adds that if Lord Champion committed a crime, they would report directly to the king himself. With that, Jin compares the lord's role to a mayor and the guild to the police. Hearing that mysterious name, the young man silently ponders about the involvement of this champion. Next, Jin hands over the scroll found with the criminals, asking if it would be of any use. Upon opening the document, Padrak surprisingly declares that it is a list of illegal buyers. While the master celebrates the capture of everyone, the warrior asks if the lord is listed there. Padrak asks him not to take the joke seriously, and Jin recognizes the man's villainy. Then, the youth states there is nothing he can do right now and quickly changes the subject. Patting the boy's head, Jin asks what will be the fate of the freed slaves. The master explains that the guild can do nothing for those without any official record. Remembering the loss of his parents, the young man asks if there are any shelters for the children. Faced with this, Padrak answers that there are no shelters, and they only help them find a job. Then, the man adds that it will be very difficult to find work because they belong to an inferior species. Hearing that, Jin silently laments that such discrimination also exists in that other place. Observing the pair, the girl vents that she would like to help but can't find any work. Suddenly, the warrior reacts as he gets an unexpected idea to resolve that difficult situation. Looking at the children, Jin asks if they would accept working if there were a good position available. With a smile on his face, the youth firmly replies that he already has a place. At that moment, Jin remembers the promise of help previously made by the captain of the Holy Knights. Then, the warrior states with a confident look that he arranged a very special place. Meanwhile, in the grand royal capital, the knights arrive on horseback at Argus's mansion. Suddenly, Argus reacts quite surprised as he feels a very strange sensation while continuing to ride. Worried, his companion asks if something happened, but he replies that he only felt a sudden chill. Arriving at the property, the knight dismounts from his horse with great calm and agility. Stopping at the indicated spot, the man informs the group that that location was far enough. Next, Argus praises the expedition's work and recommends that everyone get plenty of rest today. Entering the mansion's grand hall, the leader steps forward firmly under the watchful eyes of the butlers. At the same time, the servants bow in deep respect to greet the return of the noble captain. Handing his luggage to the butler, the knight asks if there are any updates or recent reports. Faced with this question, the old man shows great apprehension while the young servant watches quite worried. Noticing the employee's hesitation, Argus asks seriously if something bad happened in the mansion. Respectfully, the old man apologizes for the trouble, but the captain assures him he doesn't mind. Bringing his face closer, the butler whispers an important piece of information in secret directly into his ear. While the secret conversation takes place in the hall, someone observes the scene attentively from the top of the mezzanine. On the balcony, the young lady remains with her arms crossed, watching everything in absolute and deep silence. After hearing the account, Argus thanks him for the information, and the old man replies that it is his duty. Upon hearing that report, Argus states to himself that the situation was worse than he imagined. Then, the knight questions how invaders appeared in the royal capital and where they entered from. Reflecting further, Argus deduces that someone must have allowed the monsters to enter on purpose. Because of this, the leader considers the Harnisk Academy to be the most suspicious place for restricting access. Finally, the captain concludes that he needs to find a strong ally to help in that great mission. 3 days after defeating the mercenaries, the group continues walking together along a beautiful trail. As they move forward, Poful asks if there will really be a spot for him in the grand royal capital. Jin reassures the boy, reminding him that his ability to read and do math will guarantee him a good job. Extremely excited by the answer, the young boy agrees while Hakama calls out loudly for her savior. Pointing to the horizon, the girl excitedly announces that they have finally reached the grand capital. Looking where the girl pointed, the warrior reacts with great surprise at the view. Facing the vast kingdom, Jin silently comments that it was finally the grand capital. Next, the bustling city appears, filled with beautiful ancient buildings under the sunlight. Observing the hustle and bustle of the streets, the warrior comments on how full of life that place was. The girl explains that the capital thrives on imports, which is why it gathers a bit of everything. Hakama adds that residents of Kodama sell their goods there, while Jin recalls having heard that before. Upon spotting people with insect-like features, the warrior finds that variety of beings quite fascinating. Next, Jin notices the cultural mix and concludes how uniquely the society has evolved. Furthermore, the young man notes that the kingdom's streets are extremely clean and organized. Observing the children playing joyfully, Jin concludes that the local order seems quite solid. However, Jin silently ponders that even the capital's order has its problems. Looking into an alley, the warrior sees nobles dealing with people of inferior species right there. Faced with the scene, Jin concludes that every era carries its own heavy burdens. Changing the subject, Jin asks about the academy exam, and Hakama replies that it takes place next week. Hearing that classes start soon, the warrior realizes he has a little free time. Holding her fan, the young noblewoman asks irritably if those boys intend to enroll there. Without noticing the stairs, the group finally arrives at a very cozy inn to rest. Extremely enthusiastic, the children jump on the bed, celebrating that they can finally relax in that place. Sitting on the mattress, Jin comments contentedly that they finally got a real bed to sleep in. Reflective, the young man thinks they arrived safely in the capital, but now he needs to resolve important matters. Holding the pouch of coins, Jin acknowledges that living in that new era requires a lot of money. As Hakama displays the reward, the young man ponders that the amount will not last forever. Looking at the boys, Jin remembers that he urgently needs to find a good job for both of them there. Remembering Captain Argus, the warrior considers that contacting him would be the ideal shortcut for help. Thoughtful, Jin analyzes how to enter the noble's mansion without raising any suspicion in the kingdom. Looking to the side, the young man wonders if he should investigate the current corruptors first. With that, Jin remembers that there are already malicious people trying to use these creatures for their crimes. Observing the room, the warrior states that the monsters are dangerous and he will not ignore that. With a determined look, the young man guarantees he will never let the tragic history repeat itself. As he observes the kingdom's buildings, he reinforces his desire to protect all those people. Next, Jin asks how people look for information, and the girl suggests books. The young girl adds that books are expensive and that her village had to pool money together to share them. However, the girl explains that the capital has a large library for conducting research. Hearing this revelation, the young man asks in surprise if there really is a library there. Smiling at the news, Jin ponders that he will find clues about Kagura's facilities there. However, the receptionist smiles at the front desk and warns him that his entry is completely impossible. In front of the group, the woman explains that the books are national treasures with restricted access. She adds that the place is exclusive to nobles and students, making the warrior understand. Hakama reminds him that he does not even know how to read that script, and Jin admits to being illiterate there. He recalled recently learning the alphabet, but admitted that understanding full pages would take some time. Holding his hand to his forehead, Jin silently wonders what he will do from now on. While stretching, the two men confirm that they have finally found the group with the children. Suddenly, the young man looks back upon hearing someone ask if he has a second. Without warning, a man with animal ears lunges forward, throwing a quick punch at him. With complete agility, the young man blocks his opponent's attack using only his hand. Holding the strike, Jin comments ironically that he believed the streets were safe. Smiling mockingly, the attacker activates his energy and replies that the young man was mistaken. Even in the face of that energy's glow, the warrior keeps his gaze entirely calm. Next, the young man deflects his opponent's arm, blasting the energy into the air. Faced with the sudden impact, the residents in the streets look up in surprise at the illuminated sky there. Stepping back a bit, the attacker smiles and praises him, saying he has remarkably sharp instincts. Protecting the boy, Hakama notices that those men are using divine power in broad daylight. Upon asking what they want, Jin hears that someone finds his presence quite bothersome. Upon hearing that explanation, the young man understands that it is a targeted assassination. Placing his hand on his chin, Jin smiles, stating that this situation is actually perfect. Laughing hard, the man tells the young man to leave, but Jin replies that he fears no danger. Faced with that firm response, the intruder throws another punch while asking if that was really it. Without any difficulty, the warrior firmly grabs his opponent's wrist during the attack. Feeling the strike blocked, the attacker opens his eyes wide, unable to comprehend that strength. At that very moment, Jin violently slams his opponent straight onto the street pavement. Fallen on the ground, the man coughs violently after receiving the young man's devastating impact. Seeing his companion on the ground, the other attacks, building up energy and cursing the young man. Next, the intruder fires an energy wave at the attentive warrior's back. Taking no damage whatsoever, Jin dissipates the energy attack using only his arm. Even after seeing the young man's defense, the guy smiles, believing he will still win the fight. However, the warrior appears at blinding speed right in front of his opponent on the spot. Without giving him any time for any reaction, Jin grabs the enemy's neck firmly. Lifting the man off the ground, he tells the guy to come back only when he's strong enough. Then, the warrior adds, saying that is if he has the courage to try again. Stuttering heavily, the subdued man claims that the young man was not from an inferior species. Suddenly, an authoritative voice echoes, ordering everyone to stop and nobody to move there. Adjusting her posture, the guard complains about them causing trouble on her day off. Pointing her weapon, the guard declares she will take everyone straight to a cell immediately. Dropping the attacker onto the ground, Jin comments that acting flashy was truly worth it. With wide eyes, the guard screams, recognizing the young man as the inferior species from before. On the busy street, the guard points her weapon, accusing the young man of being the inferior species. With a mocking smile, the woman stares at the boy, showing complete confidence in that situation. Pointing her spear at Jin, the female warrior states that he is brave to cause trouble in the capital. She then openly declares that people of that species never learn to tell right from wrong. At that moment, a local resident intervenes, saying she witnessed the scene and saw the surprise attack against them. The witness adds that it was nothing more than self-defense, completely surprising the armed woman on the street. Observing the attackers fallen on the ground, the guard murmurs that their faces look very familiar. Leaning down near the man, the female warrior asks if they are students from Harnisk Academy over there. Placing her hand on her head, the woman laments and hopes the young lady is not involved. Upon ordering the arrest of the attackers, the guard changes the subject when young Jin asks about the lady. Curious, the boy comments that he thought patrolling the capital was an exclusive responsibility of the guild. The woman explains that she only helps with order, but admits she was just out walking to grab a bite to eat. Even while maintaining a laid-back tone, the woman assumes a very serious and focused expression as she observes everything. In silence, the female warrior acknowledges Jin's incredible strength by comparing his power to the students. Saying goodbye as she walks away, the guard asks the boy not to cause any more trouble in the royal capital. Calmly raising his hand, Jin asks the guard to take them to a specific location. Looking back, the female warrior asks in surprise which place he wishes to visit. Next, the group is taken to Captain Argus's imposing and luxurious estate. Sitting on the couch, Jin directly asks the nobleman to hire them without wasting another second. Quite confused, Argus recalls that he had offered help in case the boy needed anything. Noticing his companions, the captain comments that the group has grown, and Jin responds naturally. The young man explains that he found the bandits mentioned earlier and rescued the children who were imprisoned. When Argus asks about the criminals, the boy replies that he turned them over to the guild. Hearing this, the captain reflects in surprise on whether he really solved all of that entirely by himself. Next, Jin explains that the children have no family and belong to the inferior species. Looking at the nobleman, the young man adds that he at least wanted to find them decent work. Facing this, the female knight points out that he has no such obligation, but Jin prefers to act this way. With determination, the boy declares that he will continue taking care of the children's future until the end. Impressed by the response, Argus observes in silence while his guardian displays great discomfort. Hearing those protective words, the two siblings smile, deeply moved by such great kindness. Given the request, Argus agrees to hire the two siblings to work as live-in servants there. However, the captain looks seriously at the boy and warns that there is an important condition. The nobleman then demands that Jin become an instructor, leaving the warrior surprised. Meanwhile, the two siblings appear dressed in servant attire, ready for work. Observing the scene, the boy comments that they look very nice while the girl applauds joyfully. Thanking with a bow, the young girl bows before Argus, but he replies that it isn't necessary. Shortly after, the captain instructs his staff to educate the kids without any kind of discrimination. As the children wave gratefully, Jin waves back while following the others down the hallway. During the walk, Jin questions the true intention behind the invitation, and the captain praises his sharp perception. The nobleman admits he does not know the boy's past, but states that he wishes to trust him with this. Argus then reveals that he needs the warrior to infiltrate the prestigious academy to investigate the place. Looking attentively at his companion, Jin asks directly about the true meaning of that strange mission. The knight explains that several factions are competing for the country, making the young man question him about the king. Faced with the doubt, Argus reveals that the king is gravely ill with little time left. The nobleman warns that people with no legitimate right to the throne are conspiring to take over the kingdom. Continuing his explanation, Argus states that they are using the invaders and involving innocent people in it. Listening to that, the warrior realizes that this nobleman is not the only one under suspicion. The captain adds that dangerous individuals are acting in the shadows and they need to find their hideout soon. Next, the young man asks if the academy is the most suspicious location, receiving confirmation. Stopping before the door, Argus knocks on the wood, announcing that he is entering the room now. Opening the door, the nobleman mentions that she will guide him inside the academy. He then introduces his younger sister, Milia, who studies at that same academy. The captain tries to introduce the visitor, but the young woman interrupts him, calling out to her brother. Looking with disdain, Milia questions her brother whether he will leave the infiltration to that inferior species. Argus demands respect from the young woman, but she talks back, saying that species is already disrespectful. The noblewoman states she would even tolerate the country girl, but refuses to hand the mission over to the boy. Hearing the insult, Jin comments on her prejudice, while the captain apologizes for what happened. The female guard comments on the young woman's prejudice, but the boy talks back, saying she is prejudiced too. Firmly closing her fan, Milia asks her brother if he understood her message. The girl then explains that he needs to fulfill his duties as an instructor during the infiltration. Before them, Milia questions whether an inferior species truly possesses the necessary capacity to be an instructor. Suddenly, Hakama reveals that the boy cannot read, leaving everyone in the room completely surprised. Upon learning this, the noblewoman states that this limitation makes the infiltration plan totally impossible. Defending her friend, the little girl asserts with conviction that Jin is far more incredible than them. Confronted with that firm declaration, the noblewoman remains in absolute silence, staring at the boy beside her. Next, Milia admits that the young man at least seems to have the strength to control the students. Stepping away from the group, the noblewoman adds that being an instructor requires much more than strength. As soon as the girl leaves, Argus holds his head, showing great embarrassment over her behavior. Grabbing her own hair, the guard comments that the noblewoman really was behind those attackers. Then, Argus apologizes for his sister's behavior, and the young man says it doesn't matter. Shifting the focus, the warrior asks what he should teach, and the nobleman replies, spirit magic. The captain explains that he noticed an incredible ability in the boy regarding the control of this type of magic. Hearing this, Jin asks which part of magic he should teach, and the other replies the basics. The nobleman demonstrates 4 basic spells and assures that mastering 2 of them would already be completely sufficient. Surprised by the simplicity, the young man asks if that was all, leaving the captain very impressed. Next, Argus asks directly if the warrior has also mastered the special magic of the few. With that, Jin wonders if that mercenary leader was considered incredible in this era. Finding the situation quite interesting, the young man merely smirks softly and accepts the proposal. Focusing his power, Jin declares that he will change the common sense of this era a bit. A week later, the long-awaited entrance exam day for the famous academy finally arrives. Outside, the applicants receive their identification badges to gain access to the venue. Inside the classroom, the girl Hakama writes attentively during the written exam. Meanwhile, a staff member guides Argus and Jin down the noble institution's grand carpeted hallway. The receptionist remarks on the night's busy routine, but the captain says it is his turn. Hearing this sudden statement, Jin approaches his companion to ask what he means by that. Patiently, Argus explains that every year, a knight is selected to serve as a special instructor. Upon hearing this, the young man wonders if someone like him will truly be fit for the position. Maintaining a focused look, the boy quietly observes while continuing to walk beside them. At the same time, the guide glances subtly backward without saying a single word. Next, the elderly man stops in front of the large door and points the way into the room. Opening the entrance, the guide announces that the headmistress is already waiting for everyone to arrive. On the other side, the headmistress remains seated behind her desk with a firm composure. Respectfully greeting the lady, Argus bows and states that it has been a long time since they last met. Smiling, the lady asks if it has been since his graduation and praises his great achievements. Thanking her for the support, Argus tells the lady that it was merely his duty. Then, the headmistress openly mentions to the nobleman that she recently heard many rumors. The woman continues, stating that besides the corruptors, he faces severe internal factional disputes. Because of this, the lady admits she fully understands the lack of personnel and his extremely busy routine. Despite that, the woman emphasizes that the famous academy cannot be neglected for that reason. Glancing back, the lady questions if he truly intends to appoint that boy as an instructor. Facing the question, the institution's 2 counselors follow the conversation, paying complete attention. While the young man remains silent, the nobleman asks the lady not to worry at all. Bowing, Argus assures her that the boy is more capable than anyone else in his unit. The knight adds to his claim, stating that this holds true at least regarding combat techniques. Hearing this, the lady accepts, saying that if he guarantees it, then it must be true. Suddenly, one of the counselors slams the desk and shouts that he completely opposes this. Pointing at the group, he claims it is unacceptable for an inferior species to teach at the academy. The man fumes that the position is not meant for them and asks if they intend to bring shame. After hearing Gita speak out, the lady asks for Ludman's opinion on the matter. Ludman agrees with his colleague, reminding her that the academy houses many noble students. He adds that appointing an inferior species would trigger protests from both students and instructors. The headmistress states she understands everyone's concern, but highlights an important point before continuing. Then, The lady decides to hear the young man's own opinion regarding the entire situation. Given the opportunity, the boy steps forward to address everyone in the room. Bowing respectfully, Jin apologizes for the delay and reveals that he came from Kodama village. Impressed, the headmistress notes that even while being ridiculed, the young man maintains a calm composure. Looking firmly at those present, Jin states he understands the concerns and asks a single question. The warrior asks if he is unsuitable due to belonging to an inferior species or due to a lack of skill. The lady promptly answers that skill is the only thing that matters for that role. Next, the headmistress asks directly if the boy can prove he possesses such capability. Seizing the moment, Argus suggests conducting a practical test to prove the warrior's strength. Shortly after, everyone heads to the renowned academy's massive magic practice field. Gita gestures excitedly, explaining that since it is exam day, almost no students are around. In a provocative tone, the counselor adds that this way the boy will avoid public humiliation. Facing the counselor's provocative comment, the young boy merely observes him while remaining silent. Next, Gita explains that the rules are simple and that they would fight using only spirit magic. The headmistress reinforces that seeing the boy's true strength is the best way to evaluate him. Watching from afar, the students comment curiously that a mock battle seemed to be taking place there. While watching, Milia considers that this would be the first time seeing the counselor actually fight. Facing the challenge, Jin simply lets out a calm sigh and prepares for combat. Watching from above, the headmistress declares that they will see what that inferior species is capable of. Beside her, Argus quietly admits that he too would get to see the young warrior fight today. The narration explains that the physical capabilities of the inferior species were low and lacked great strength. Next, Gita asks his opponent if he is truly prepared for that massive clash. With a mocking smile, the counselor states that he will launch his attack right that moment. Firing a massive sphere of fire, Gita shouts that he will take the first strike of the battle. With extreme agility, Jin easily dodges the powerful attack without taking any damage. Impressed by the quick dodge, the students react in absolute shock upon witnessing that scene. Looking at his surroundings, Gita mockingly notes that some students were watching that grand fight. Then, Gita channels his power and fires multiple energy projectiles at the young warrior. With that, the devastating blast of energy rapidly advances, sweeping across the entire battle arena. Executing a backflip, the boy nimbly dodges while the explosions occur behind him. Seeing him dodge, Gita scoffs, asserting that the inferior species only knows how to run from attacks. The counselor boasts, saying that he graduated as the top student in the academy. Gathering massive energy, Gita proudly declares that an inferior species can never win this combat. Facing all the provocations, Jin merely lets out a light chuckle, demonstrating absolute composure. The young warrior quietly considers that such power should not be used against people. Then, the boy concludes there is no choice and lands on the ground ready to act. With a swift motion, Jin extends his hand and begins to concentrate his own energy. Staring intently at his opponent, he declares that he will display just a fraction of his capability. Suddenly, dark fissures emerge in the air, while Gita watches the scene in complete perplexity. Instantly, the crushing pressure forces the counselor to drop to his knees on the ground. Witnessing that display of power, the headmistress and Ludman freeze completely in amazement. Even Argus watches the scene jaw-dropped, unable to contain his surprise. Faced with that impressive scene, young Milia observes the displayed power in absolute shock. Slammed violently to the ground, Gita asks in sheer desperation about what just happened there. Walking calmly, the warrior explains he altered gravity and asks if he is unfamiliar with that magic. With a smile on his face, Jin states that there seems to be a lot to teach at that famous academy. Tightening his gloves firmly, he adds that he will teach not just the students, but all of them. Face to face with that enormous, overwhelming pressure, the counselor remains completely pinned to the arena's destroyed ground. Looking up terrified, the opponent stares at the young man standing without showing any effort. Then, Jin snaps his fingers to deactivate the effect of that great magic at the location. Freed from the weight, the counselor collapses to his knees on the broken stone, trying to catch his breath. Furious and scared, Gita shouts, asking what he did and questions if that was magic. Gesticulating wildly, the man claims to have never seen such magic and accuses the youth of cheating. Observing the argument from afar, the superiors watch the counselor's outburst in front of Jin. Impressed with the result, the headmistress declares the case closed while the other counselor agrees. Around the arena, students whisper, shocked by the quick victory of that inferior species. Quite surprised, Milia thinks that was certainly a very special type of magic. The young woman ponders how an inferior species could possess power without the blessing of the spirits. Staring intently, the girl remains completely suspicious in the face of that display of inexplicable strength. Suddenly, Gita grabs the young man's clothes, demanding answers, while Jin asks him to calm down. A week later, the Great Academy appears on the horizon, training the kingdom's new warriors. In the grand auditorium, students gather, prepared to learn how to defeat the dangerous invaders. The headmistress warns that those unable to keep up with the classes will be expelled from the academy without any mercy. She adds that graduating from the place will allow the youths to achieve their dream of becoming knights. Then, the woman concludes her speech, reinforcing that success depends exclusively on skill. From high up in the mezzanine, the student comments to his classmates about the large number of freshmen. Meanwhile, another student waves at Milia, reaching out his hand to call her attention there. Smiling, the boy says it is rare to see Reyes at the ceremony, as he thought she didn't care about it. The noblewoman counters his comment, asking if he wasn't also looking to make friends with some new noble. Suddenly, the young man interrupts the conversation, quite curious as he notices something unusual in the seats below. Observing the audience, he questions in surprise the presence of that inferior species in the instructor's area. In shock at the revelation, the student asks his companion what she thinks of that young man. Quite tense from the direct question, the boy awkwardly admits he doesn't even know how to answer. Holding her fan, Reyes replies that before, she also thought he was just an inferior species. Meanwhile, Jin remains seated in silence while noticing the curious glances coming from the mezzanine. Observing the massive place, the warrior quietly ponders that investigating everything there will take quite a lot of time. Faced with those heavy stares, the young man decides he first needs to change that perception of an inferior species. Faced with all this attention, the young man thinks he is attracting too much notice and looking quite suspicious there. As the bell tolls, the imposing academy building emerges beneath the clear sky of the capital. Next, the instructor on stage announces that magic classes will resume starting today. The man advises the students not to be outdone by the freshmen during the upcoming practical classes. Smiling wickedly, the teacher adds that he would like to say that, but he can't. Pointing at the half-empty auditorium, he mockingly asks if they have lost all their motivation. Turning her face away in disdain, the young noblewoman firmly replies that she has plenty of motivation. With a wicked smile, the teacher scoffs, asking who would want to listen to an inferior species speak. The man reveals he spread the notice about the class being taught by an inferior species. Changing his tone, the teacher calls Jin forward and asks him to introduce himself to the class. Stepping forward, the young man states with a smile that his name is Shidu Jin. Next, the young man informs the students that he will be teaching spirit magic for a while. Looking at the class, the new instructor adds that he hopes to get along well with everyone. Crossing his arms, the red-haired student interrupts, asking if he can really teach this class. With a calm smile, Jin simply replies that this is something for the student to decide for himself. With a smile, he adds that anyone who considers the class useless doesn't need to stay. Next, the instructor warns that there is only one rule everyone must follow. Gathering energy in his hands, Jin demands that they never use this power against other people. The young man explains that this magic serves to neutralize the incredible regenerative ability of the invaders. However, the instructor points out that this effect does not affect humans and asks for the reason. Clenching his energized fist, Jin firmly declares that this power has a single purpose. Upon hearing the plea not to misuse the power, the noblewoman remains silent, mocking the guidance. The laughing student states that power is just power, without any difference. Next, the student says sarcastically that he came to see an inferior species class. Smiling mockingly, the female student adds that an inferior species without power simply fears comparisons. Faced with so many taunts, the various students present in the room begin to laugh at the young man. Even amidst all the laughter, the young man observes the class while maintaining a calm expression. Next, the instructor challenges the students to try attacking him if they think he lacks power. From the stage, Jin tells the student to fire his most powerful attack directly at him. With a smile, the warrior promises to leave if the student manages to cause him any injury. Smiling mockingly, the student claims to the class that he will regret that challenge. Concentrating his energy, the boy shouts a warning that it will be too late to back down. Faced with the danger, the other student screams in panic, telling his classmate to stop the attack. Ignoring the warning, the attacker unleashes all his power with extreme violence. With that, the beam of light flashes across the auditorium, going straight toward the young instructor. Upon crashing into the ground, the strike creates a massive explosion, covering everything in smoke. Observing the smoke, the student smirks, believing he hit his target. However, the energy completely dissipates without leaving a single scratch on the warrior, who remains motionless. Suddenly, a ray of light grazes the attacker and hits the wall. Frightened, the boy turns around and notices the cracked wall right behind his head. With a fixed gaze, Jin states that the attack would have finished him off if he had wanted to. As he lowers his hand, the energy barrier around the young man gradually disappears into the air. In the audience, the red-faced student asks himself in shock if that was really spirit magic. Before the frightened students, the instructor reminds them that they called him an inferior species for being weak. With his hand energized, Jin asks what they should call him now that he has proven himself stronger. Next, the young man asks with a smile if the class still considers him an inferior species. Annoyed, the student gets up and asks if the young man knows the conditions of magic. Next, Jin remembers that he was attacked by the student and demands an immediate answer from him. Surprised by the demand, the boy asks confusedly if it didn't depend solely on visualization. He explains that one only needs to channel divine power and project it to the spirits that way. Hearing the explanation, Jin states that visualization is important, but not the main condition. The young man explains that spirits or nanomachines need to receive a specific wave frequency. Without understanding the term, the student hears Jin state that there are exactly 8 fundamental frequencies. Next, the young man demonstrates the fire element as one of those frequencies to everyone. Right after, he manifests lightning in his hand while continuing his explanation to the class. Continuing, the young man displays concentrated wind over his hand before the class. Upon showing ice, Jin points out that the class should only know up to that point. Impressed by the lesson, the students listen as the instructor warns them that there are other variations beyond that. The warrior presents gravity manipulation and also the alteration of light intensity. Next, Jin demonstrates atmospheric pressure manipulation and recalls the strike shown earlier. Finally, the young man reveals spatial protection, generating a perfect shield in front of everyone. Completely shocked by the explanation, the student asks if he has mastered 8 types of magic. Right after, Jin calmly explains that proper visualization is the key to transformation. With a confident smile on his face, the warrior warns that now they will begin training. Next, the instructor calmly asks the class if they can start the lesson. Shortly after, Jin walks calmly through the academy hallways while several students talk around him. Pondering in silence, the young man recognizes the need to investigate that huge and bustling academy. However, the young man notices the constant presence of students and finds nothing suspicious there. Realizing he needs to seek out a restricted area, Jin spots Milia standing right in front of him. Glancing sideways, the warrior observes the girl maintaining a very attentive and serious posture. In response, the young noblewoman returns the gaze, displaying extreme suspicion toward that scene. Approaching the young man, Milia directly asks who he really is at that moment. The noblewoman admits he is not normal and questions his origin as an inferior species. Next, the young woman states that an inferior species could never master all elements. Jin explains that anyone can use them by switching frequencies, but the young woman tells him not to oversimplify. Furthermore, the noblewoman retorts, saying that if it were possible, he wouldn't attract so much attention. Next, Milia suggests they go somewhere else to continue talking. With that, the two walk to the academy's outer hallway under the sunlight. Stopping along the way, the girl asks if the young man will finally answer her questions now. In response, Jin states he is an ancient human, but the noblewoman thinks it's a joke. Curious, the girl decides to ask what he was doing 100 million years ago. Placing his hand on his chin, the warrior replies that he did many things and was an agent. Surprised by the term, Milia questions it, and the young man explains that he worked hard for his country. Next, Jin adds that he fought countless villains throughout his ancient life. He remembered that, although it was 100 million years ago, that era was quite memorable. The warrior states he can remember everything as if it had happened just yesterday. Reminiscing about the past, the young man recalls facing armed enemies during his intense battles. Remembering the explosions and fights, Jin comments with a smile that he feels great nostalgia. Facing this, Milia asks how he ended up asleep, and the young man replies that he simply failed. The warrior explains that he was arrogant to think he could solve everything alone in the past. As a result, he ended up losing everything, unable to do anything against the threat of the monsters. Upon hearing the story, Milia crosses her arms, doubting how much of it was actually true. Changing the subject, Jin asks where they are going, and the girl replies she is just the guide. As they enter the old and dusty room, the two observe that mysterious and abandoned environment. Observing the location, the warrior asks about the room, and Milya explains that it is the storeroom. Placing his hand on his chin, Jin asks inquisitively if the place is just a storeroom. Looking at the bookshelves, the young man notices a small owl statue among the books. With a very attentive gaze, the warrior analyzes the mysterious object with utmost attention. Approaching it, the young man asks why, and Milya reveals that she conducted her own investigation. Showing the map, the girl explains that there is a hidden space large enough there. Agreeing with the girl, Jin turns the owl statue, believing there is something hidden there. With that gesture, the bookshelf moves, revealing a secret passage to the underground. Before the open path, the warrior remarks that the young woman's suspicion was completely right. Pointing at the location, Milya asks how he knew, since it was covered in dust. Pointing at the statue, Jin explains that the spot was clean and his experience helped. Asking the girl to wait, the young man moves ahead alone while the noblewoman insists on coming along. Looking back, Jin warns that there might be a dangerous corruptor, but Milya tells him not to underestimate her. The girl states that she has high grades and skills that are not behind her brother's. At that statement, Jin merely smiles and replies calmly that he will trust the girl. Next, the two begin descending the dark underground staircase while the young man lights the way. Noticing the depth of the passage, the young man comments on the path, and the noblewoman compliments the lighting. Advancing through the darkness, Jin compares the place to a game, and the young woman asks about the word. Resuming their previous conversation, Milya questions him about spending his life facing villains. The girl asks if he has any suspects, and the young man says she asks for too much. Placing his hand on his chin, Jin merely ponders for a moment and admits to having a suspicion. The warrior reveals he suspects Professor Rudman, and the girl asks how he figured that out. Jin explains that the professor acts calm while talking, but becomes completely distant when he is alone. The young man adds that he appears to be very vigilant and acting against his own will. Smiling, Milya admits she thought Professor Gilda was suspicious, but the young man dismisses that possibility. Jin says that the professor expresses everything easily on her face and has a good heart. Finally, the two reach the end of the path and observe the immense underground chamber. Looking around, the young woman comments in surprise that she never imagined such a vast space beneath the academy. As soon as the warrior stops walking, the girl asks curiously if he found something there. With a deeply impressed look, Jin admits he never imagined finding that in that specific place. Before them stands the massive door of one of the laboratories that Kagura left around the world. Standing before the gigantic door, Jin states that the place is a laboratory left behind by Kagura. Next, the young man plainly explains that the door is protected by several nanomachines. Quite impressed by the discovery, Milya questions how a gigantic door could exist beneath the academy. When asked if they can open it, Jin replies that an access key is usually required. Placing a hand near his chin, the warrior begins to reflect on that required key. Jin recalls that Hakama inherited the key and deduces that someone in the capital possesses another one. Faced with this conclusion, the warrior decides to act and begins to concentrate his own divine power. Upon touching the surface, the system recognizes Jin's authorization and unlocks the gate. Next, the huge metal gate slowly opens, revealing the passage inside. As they enter, the young man states that whoever is trying to bring chaos to the kingdom is right there. In front of the pair, a gigantic monster trapped in a cell at the back of the chamber comes into view. Terrified by the scene, Milya trembles, unable to believe that monster is inside the academy. Curious, the noblewoman asks how he opened it, and Jin replies that being an ancient human helps. Upon hearing that statement, Milya merely repeats the term ancient human to herself in shock. Looking at the young man, the girl remains still while trying to process that entire unbelievable revelation. Unable to believe it, the young noblewoman asks if he truly is a human from 100 million years ago. Without answering the question, the young man silently observes the monster locked inside that dark cell. Looking around the chamber, the warrior remarks to his companion that all of it seems quite strange. Observing very closely, Jin questions why the creatures are caged without trying to escape. Furthermore, the young man notes that none of the other monsters show any intention of fleeing from their bars. He remembers that the beasts captured by the mercenaries also remained calm in their cells. Standing before the giant creature, Jin wonders how they managed to transport monsters that large to that underground level. Adjusting her fan, the girl remarks that her brother was right about his suspicions against the academy. Milya suggests waiting at the location for the culprit, but the young man immediately disagrees with her proposed strategy. Next, Jin declares that they must prioritize isolating the academy and eliminating those monsters. The noblewoman questions if they should let the villain go, but the warrior considers the danger of the monsters escaping. The young man warns that the students on the upper floor would be the first victims of that tragedy. He adds that her own brother would prioritize everyone's safety before capturing the culprit. Agreeing with the idea, Milia falls silent while Jin reveals that he has a very bad feeling about everything. The young man claims his instincts never fail and decides to investigate the laboratory further. With that, the young man asks the girl to inform Argus to isolate the entire academy. Next, the young woman steps away from the location while the warrior decides to press forward entirely alone. Looking upward, Jin observes a large clock attached to the wall in that quiet environment. Walking through the passage, the young man hopes to find some clue about the current grave situation there. Meanwhile, the old clock on the wall continues ticking, keeping time in the place. In another hallway of the institution, Gita walks angrily while students mock him in secret. Upon hearing the students commenting on his recent defeat, the counselor clenches his fist. Next, the man complains that inferior species has completely ruined his entire reputation. Next, the counselor questions the 8 magics displayed and claims that the young man cheated. With that, Gita declares he will expose him no matter what as he walks away from that place. Approaching him, the headmistress asks the man to stop making those strange movements there. Next, the headmistress comments that she will not criticize his hobbies, leaving the counselor quite shocked. Changing the subject, the headmistress asks if he has seen Rudman, leaving the counselor quite confused. The counselor explains that he has not seen the man since that day's entrance ceremony. Upon hearing this, the woman laments having to talk to him about the freshman's curriculum. Looking up, the man notices something unusual and mutters in surprise at the scene. Looking through the window, the man wonders what that shadowy mist over the buildings could be. Meanwhile, young Milia runs up the stairs quickly to warn her brother. Passing through the secret passage, the girl stops at the door, trying to catch her breath. As she catches her breath, she says she needs to warn her brother when a voice questions her. Startled by that sudden question, the young woman slowly turns around with a look of pure terror. Standing in the room, the man approaches and calls her directly by her family surname. Faced with that terrifying figure, Milia exclaims in surprise, recognizing that it was Professor Rudman himself. Meanwhile, in the underground level, Jin advances down the illuminated hallway until he finds a fully open door. Looking inside the place, the warrior wonders in great surprise what that could be. Inside the room, a huge pulsing sphere remains fully connected to several cables along the floor. Observing the structure closely, he notes that the sphere keeps pulsing as if it were alive. While typing at the control terminal, Jin wonders if Kagura could have been the creator of that thing. Suddenly, a compartment opens on the desk panel and raises a metal container. Looking at the revealed object, Jin analyzes that discovery, trying to understand its true purpose there. Inside the box, the young man finds a message cube and the nano machine injector. Upon activating the glowing cube, Jin hopes to find information explaining the current situation there. In the recorded message, Kagura asks if his companion can hear him and notes that he managed to arrive. The scientist explains that the location is the closest laboratory to where he awakened. Next, the scientist reveals that they were building a truly incredible device in that location. He adds in the recording that a portion of the device's functions was sealed within the nanomachines. Praising his own genius, Kagura asks his friend if he can guess what device it is. Next, the scientist reveals it to be a teleportation device, leaving Jin completely surprised. Unable to believe it, the young man repeats in surprise the idea of a teleportation device. Standing before the huge metal cell, the warrior observes the gigantic creature trapped in that environment. Looking at the large pulsing sphere, Jin realizes in shock the true purpose of that experiment. Trapped inside a metal cage, the giant creature remains fully confined in that chamber. At the same time, the hand of the old clock mounted on the wall moves in silence. Meanwhile, the complex astronomical clock mounted on the wall continues marking the passage of time. Right up ahead, the huge reddish sphere pulses with great intensity in the center of the laboratory. Analyzing the projected information, Jin concludes that device was built to perform teleportation. The narration explains that this technology connects one space to another to instantly transfer matter. With that, The young man understands that the invaders appeared in the royal capital through that teleportation. Recalling Kagura's message, the warrior reflects on the original design left behind by the scientist. The original design showed a technological pod created specifically to transport people. Observing the location, Jin notes with surprise that the current structure looks entirely different from the original. Facing that strange pulsing structure, the young man wonders what that really represents there. Suddenly, the old clock on the wall makes a loud clicking sound as its hands move. At that exact moment, the large red sphere shoots a blinding glare throughout the chamber. Reacting quickly, Jin raises his arm in front of his face to protect himself from the intense light. At the same time, the creatures trapped in the cages begin to react under that bright glare. Inside the cell, the giant creature stares intently at the chamber while emitting a deeply threatening aura. With that, an intense beam of red energy shoots out from the cage toward the ceiling. On the outside, the female knight warns of an emergency, and Argus replies that he already knows. Looking up at the sky, the captain worries and mutters as he notices the beginning of that grave event. From the reddish sky, countless monsters begin falling in droves upon the prosperous royal capital. Back in the room, Professor Rudman ironically asks the reason for such a serious expression. With a rather cunning look, the villain continues calling the young girl by her surname. Manifesting her energy, Milia tells the man to get out of the way and accuses him of the crime. Maintaining his serene composure, the professor claims she had already been investigating the situation for a long time. Upon hearing that it was too late, the noblewoman anxiously questions the real meaning of that statement. In response, the villain reveals in a grim tone that today they would execute the final plan. The villain explains that he moved up the date because she kept continuously investigating the place. Narrowing his eyes, Rudman adds that this new young man will become a very dangerous threat. Meanwhile, Jin runs at high speed through the underground corridors to try to stop the tragedy. Advancing through the darkness, the warrior remains determined to find and neutralize all that terrible danger. Before the young noblewoman, the professor reveals that the young man has already found that secret passage. Then, Rudman questions if he is down there and decides to eliminate the danger now. Focusing her own energy, Milia taunts the villain by asking if he can really win. With a wicked smile, the man firmly answers that he will most certainly win. While Rudman boasts about having invincible power, Hakama appears carrying a large vase. Shocked by the scene, the young noblewoman listens to the villain promise to show his power. Before the professor finishes proclaiming his new power, the girl strikes his head. After knocking out the enemy, Hakama wipes her forehead, greatly relieved by the immense effort. Looking at the man unconscious on the floor, the girl proudly declares that she won. Surprised, Milia asks the reason for her presence, and the girl replies she was looking for Jin. Looking out the window, Hakama warns that the situation outside is chaotic, and they need the warrior. The young student nervously explains that she saw the young man enter that very dark place. Milia asks if she is a freshman, and the girl stutters as she introduces herself as Kudo. Quite apprehensive, young Kudo questions if it was really right to attack a professor like that. Unconcerned, Hakama calmly replies that it is fine, and decides to move forward right away. Pointing at the noblewoman, the girl suggests blaming her since no one saw their faces. Meanwhile, the warrior runs quickly up the stairs trying to reach where everyone was. At the same time, the girl turns her head upon noticing footsteps approaching the dark passage. Emerging in the passage, Jin calls out to the group and asks what happened to the professor. Holding his arm, Hakama warns him about the chaos outside, and he answers that he knows. With an attentive look, the warrior reveals that all the laboratory invaders disappeared from the place. Hearing this revelation, Milia puts her hand to her mouth as she understands what it means. Then, the whole group rushes toward the outside of the large building. Stepping out onto the balcony, they all watch the great city burning in flames and smoke. Through the busy streets of the capital, a monster charges at residents running for safety. At the same time, a flying creature appears in the sky and snatches a victim mid-flight. As the smoke spreads, a monster's colossal paw stomps down, crushing the city ground. Right after, a colossal creature appears, destroying the kingdom as it moves toward the castle. Beside the ruins, another giant monster full of tentacles emerges, emitting a loud noise. Opening its massive mouth, the beast roars violently as it spreads its devastating power over everything. Facing the devastating scene, Milia simply exclaims that the royal capital itself is under attack. With a serious look, Jin admits his mistake and states that he should have destroyed the device. Pointing at the scene, Hakama screams Jin's name, asking him to look at that. Hovering over all the buildings, the giant monster channels a massive amount of energy all around. Opening its large mouth, the beast focuses a beam of light ready to fire at the city. At that exact moment, the energy attack remains aimed directly at the distant royal castle. Watching the attack, Milia warns that the great beast is targeting the royal family's castle. Holding the injector, Jin states it was his mistake and assures he will resolve the situation. Upon injecting the product, the narration explains that the power grants a simplified teleportation feature. In the recording, Kagura warns that the energy of the nanomachines limits its use to once a day. As the beast fires its beam, Kagura adds that the range is restricted to the line of sight. At extreme speed, the devastating energy beam charges straight toward the castle tower. In front of the young girls, a bright flash appears in the air, indicating the activation of teleportation. In that same instant, the warrior appears floating in the air right in front of the beam of light. Raising his energy shield, Jin blocks the attack and completes the ability to jump. As a massive monster advances, destroying houses, the residents run hurriedly to save themselves. Running hurriedly down the building's large hallway, the young guard tries to reach her goal. Violently kicking the door open, the guard alerts Padrak about the monster on the outer walls. Looking through the large window, Padrak calmly replies that he was already aware of that grave fact. Next, the guildmaster adds that nothing more can be done in that terrible situation. The man explains that everyone capable of fighting is already active in the streets. Furthermore, he points out that the available holy knights are also already in combat. Upon hearing the explanation, the guard questions the statement, and Padrak reveals their absence. The master adds that the knights are far from the royal capital carrying out an important mission. Suddenly, a colossal creature appears, landing violently and destroying the city ground. As the beast roars, Padrak explains that the attack was fully planned by their enemies. The master reflects that with the great commander present, they might be able to contain the danger. At that moment, the giant creature fires a devastating beam of energy straight at the city. Closing his eyes before the trail of destruction, Padrak states that it is the end of everything. Suddenly, the guard shouts in surprise, telling the master to look at what is happening in the city. With a watchful gaze, the warrior observes the attack while focusing all his attention. Then, Jin holds up the protective barrier to successfully block that energy beam. Watching the scene, the guard reveals, quite surprised, that the young man came from Kodama village. Meanwhile, the colossal creature remains with its back turned in the middle of the city, causing massive destruction. With extreme agility, the young man lands firmly on the ground to begin combat. Concentrating his divine power, the young man gathers a lot of energy in his hand to fire soon. Next, Jin fires an extremely devastating beam of energy against the monster's body. Being hit head-on by the violent attack, smoke rises from the monster's injured body. Keeping his eyes fixed, the young man observes the beast, trying to understand its durability. Even suffering severe damage to its shoulder, the massive creature remains standing before the young man. Analyzing the enemy, Jin states that the massive size of that monster prevents an instant defeat. With that, the warrior admits that the current confrontation will not be simple as usual. Faced with the situation, the young man concentrates his divine power and manifests a sharp blade. Wielding the weapon, Jin confidently declares that he will use that battle to get some exercise. Then, the warrior assumes his combat stance, prepared to charge at the enemy. Advancing with extreme agility, the young man delivers a fast, powerful slash against the monster. With the impact, the attack hits the beast's body, making the creature roar loudly. Right after, the young man leaps high into the air to better position himself in the great battle. Thinking fast, the warrior figures the cut will regenerate, but it will buy him very valuable time. Keeping an extremely serious look, the young man reminds himself to stay focused. Next, Jin declares that he will apply all the basic concepts of using nanomachines. The young man explains that he cancels out his own body weight by manipulating the surrounding gravity. With that, he sets his stance with precision, while channeling energy into his big move. Furthermore, the warrior adds that he can generate wind by manipulating atmospheric pressure itself. Meanwhile, at another spot, a young fighter shouts as he tries to resist the monster's attack. Suddenly, an intense fireball comes flying rapidly toward the fearsome creature. The attack hits the beast head-on, while other allies announce they have come to help. The fighter asks who they are, and the youths answer that they are students from Harnisk Academy. Greatly relieved, the warrior thanks the students and praises the courage they showed there. Next, the young apprentices worriedly admit that the royal capital is facing serious trouble. Encouraging his companions, the student states that they simply need to do their best right now. At that exact moment, the warrior steps firmly on the ground to surge forward at full speed. In the blink of an eye, Jin appears, slicing through both monsters with a devastating strike. Surprised by the sudden attack, the young students react without understanding what just happened. Looking at their savior, the student asks if that young man really belongs to the so-called inferior species. As he advances, Jin ponders that the beast will take time to regenerate and decides to close in. In response, the colossal creature roars loudly while preparing another massive attack against the area. Suddenly, the monster fires 2 intense energy beams straight toward the young man. With great agility, the young man leaps high into the air while the energy blasts the ground below. Analyzing the enemy, Jin concludes that aside from that attack, the creature poses no threat. Moving swiftly, the warrior cuts down another beast in midair while saving a person. Before the beast can attack again, Jin declares that he will end the confrontation shortly. Speeding up his movement, the young man thinks to himself that he needs to be even faster there. Focusing his energy, the warrior insists he must increase his speed even further now. At extreme speed, Jin charges directly at the massive creature to finish the great battle. With a violent impact, the blade strikes the stone ground and shatters the terrain. Next, the warrior spins his body and delivers an upward slash against the beast. Struck by surprise, the huge monster falls back, roaring without understanding where that came from. Watching everything from afar, Argus Walton and his companions follow the fight with great apprehension. From high up on the balcony, the young women watch the scene completely paralyzed by such a display of strength. Charging at top speed, the young man cuts through the air, ready to swiftly end that great battle. With precise movements, the young man delivers multiple swift slashes and shreds the enemy completely. Continuing that devastating assault, the warrior pierces the creature's defense with extreme ease. With that, several blades of energy envelop the monster's giant body without relent. Next, a giant vertical cut splits the beast's face right down to the middle of its chest. Hovering high in the sky, Jin watches the sliced body of the beast freeze in midair. Descending rapidly toward the ground, the young man prepares to deliver the final blow. Concentrating all his divine power, the young man declares that this will be the absolute end. With an overwhelming impact, Jin destroys the beast's core in a massive explosion of power. Completely disintegrated, the colossal creature dissolves into the air as the sky shines once more. With the impact, a gigantic pillar of energy shoots into the sky above the city. With the explosion of the devastating attack, a gigantic beam of light shoots straight into the sky. Inside the wide hallway, 2 people watch in fear as the entire grand structure shakes violently. Facing the sudden tremor, the frightened pair wonders, completely baffled by what was happening. Landing firmly on the roof, Jin observes the defeated monster smoking in the background. Turning back slightly, the young man leaves the witness wondering who he really was. 3 days after the incident, the townspeople work together to rebuild the buildings. Watching from his bedroom window, the warrior tracks the movement of the people on the main street. Stretching in the room, the young man ponders that there was no major damage despite the scare. Sitting on the bed, Jin acknowledges that this is due to the great efficiency of the Holy Knights. The narration explains that the Knights were on high alert against the large mutant monsters. Because of this, the recovery of the entire city happened extremely fast after the battle. Furthermore, the famous academy was entirely cordoned off by guards to carry out the investigations. During the process, the professor considered the mastermind, and Mr. Rudman were properly captured and handcuffed. Next, the headmistress and other suspects were also taken for interrogation in the royal capital. Lying in bed, Jin calmly thinks that they stayed in that place for only a single day. However, the young man recognizes that this recent incident brought him a new and major challenge. He analyzes that enemies gathered together are easy to fight, but once scattered, it becomes impossible to eliminate them all. Facing this situation, Jin concludes that he needs to get even stronger to protect everyone. Looking at the glowing cube in his hands, the warrior ponders how to achieve this. Hearing a knock at the door, the young man turns immediately and asks who is there. Opening the door, Jin reacts with surprise as he faces who had arrived to visit him at that moment. Wearing an elegant outfit, the noblewoman bows, stating that she came to escort him to the master. The warrior recalls the break at the academy, but she informs him that her brother is calling for him. Smiling, the girl thanks him for his help in the incident and adds that there is another important matter. Surprised, Jin asks if she came personally to call him, and the young woman confirms with utter firmness. The noblewoman justifies that she would never send a mere servant to call someone so important there. Proudly, the girl declares that she came there in person, officially representing her noble family. Jin asks if she stopped calling him that, and Milia replies that she reflected on her attitudes. Dramatically, the noblewoman states that no one should judge by appearances, but rather show complete respect. Appearing at the door, Hakama watches the scene and comments ironically about that sudden change. Hearing her name, the girl simply explains that she was just quite bored. Annoyed by the teasing, Milia hides her face behind her fan and grumbles about the girl. Hearing that, the warrior questions whether the young woman had truly reflected on her attitudes. Next, everyone arrives together at the captain's imposing mansion under a radiant blue sky. Upon entering the place, the servants bow deeply to greet the young noblewoman. Then, the butler asks the young servants to guide the visitors through the large hallway. Observing the boys, Jin comments that they seem accustomed to the work, receiving very sincere thanks. Next, the warrior asks if both were injured during the recent commotion in the city. Smiling, the boys explain that everyone in the mansion protected them with great bravery. Noticing their good treatment, Jin is pleased to hear the praise for his actions. Curious, the young man asks who spread this and discovers it was the two nobles of the mansion. With pride, Milia declares that spreading his achievements is her natural duty as his disciple. Next, the noblewoman instructs the young servants to follow the example of her great master. Speaking in a low voice, the young boy comments to Jin that the noblewoman used to be quite strict before. The boy adds that she recently improved, making Jin compare her attitude to Sarlis's. Arriving before the imposing doors, the group waits in silence for permission to enter the room. Knocking gently, the young maid announces that she brought the young man and receives permission to enter. Upon entering the room, they find Argus standing beside a very imposing man. With a focused gaze, the beast-eared warrior watches the visitor's arrival. Smiling very amiably, Argus thanks the warrior for his presence and invites him to sit down. The knight apologizes for the sudden summons, but Jin replies that it is no problem. Next, Argus introduces the guildmaster of the royal capital to his guest. Continuing the introduction, the nobleman reveals that the man beside him is named Hardin Gunslot. Greeting the visitor with a handshake, Hardin recognizes the effort shown by Jin. Sitting down again, the master decides to speak openly about everything that happened in those days. The leader states that the country would be facing a terrible crisis without his intervention. Bowing his head with respect, the veteran deeply thanks him for saving the country. With extreme modesty, Jin calmly replies that he merely defeated the giant creature during the attack. The warrior adds that the holy knights were the ones truly responsible for containing the damage. Observing the young man's stance, Hardin thinks in silence about how he demonstrates such humility. Then, Jin asks if that was all they needed, but Hardin replies that it wasn't. The master explains that the royal family of that country themselves wishes to meet with him. Upon hearing this, the young man asks about the royal family, while Argus demands to clarify something first. With a very serious expression, Hardin asks directly who the young man really is. The veteran explains that with guild members everywhere, no information escapes him. Then, Hardin apologizes for the invasion, but reveals he had him investigated very thoroughly. Intervening in the conversation, Argus firmly adds that this time he won't accept any evasive answer. As the girls watch in silence, the captain asks directly where the young man came from. Then, Argus completes the question by demanding to know what his true objective is there. Hearing the demand for an answer, Jin just listens, maintaining a completely steady gaze. Faced with the demand, Argus directly asks why the young man came to this country. With a fixed gaze, the captain insists, demanding that the guy answer without hiding anything. Adjusting his coat, Jin calmly replies that he wasn't exactly trying to hide the truth. Next, the guy explains he just thought they wouldn't believe him if he said anything. With a friendly smile, Argus immediately states that he will believe everything he says there. Faced with that answer, Jin smiles quite satisfied and declares that he will accept that word of trust. Assuming a very focused look, the young man begins to reveal his true ancient origin. Upon hearing the account, the captain immediately remembers the great taboo of Kodama village. In total shock, Argus realizes that he is the man asleep behind those sealed doors. Reflecting on the story, Hardin admits it's hard to believe, but confirms he trusts him. With pride, Milia adds that her master opened the ancient doors in the academy's basement. At that moment, the image of the huge, sealed metal door in the basement comes to mind. Hiding her face behind her fan, the young noblewoman states that everyone saw the master's power. Watching his sister, Argus calls her name, quite embarrassed by such exaggerated behavior. Then, the captain asks in surprise why she changed her attitude so suddenly. In response, Jin reveals that he was asleep beneath that country for all this long time. The young man explains that he came to the royal capital wanting to get information about this new era. Upon hearing this, Hardin questions what information he was seeking, and the guy answers two things. Next, Jin calmly states that his first matter concerns the terrible corruptors. The young man reveals that those monsters also existed 100 million years ago, surprising both of them. With an attentive gaze, Jin states that they should have never survived to this current era. Curious, Hardin asks the reason for that, and Jin answers that it's because of the spirits. The guy explains that 100 million years ago, spirits were scattered all over the world. Back then, the Great Structure activated the system to spread this energy everywhere. With that, an intense beam shot into the sky to cover the planet's entire atmosphere. Then, this energy spread across the globe, reaching every corner of the Earth's surface. Jin continues explaining that those monsters could only survive in completely polluted areas of the planet. However, the spirits possess the power to fully purify these polluted environments over time. Faced with this, Hardin asks why they still exist, and the warrior admits he doesn't know. Concluding his speech, the guy puts his hand inside his coat to silently check something. Showing the hologram, Jin explains that according to a friend, the corruptors seem to be evolving significantly. Faced with that mysterious projection, Hardin immediately asks if such technology belonged to an ancient civilization. Observing the glowing panel, the master admits he has no idea how it works. Upon hearing the account, the captain questions if the guy really claims to be 100 million years old. Jin explains he expected to find many records on how the people of this world fought the monsters. Questioned about his second goal, the warrior answers that he was looking for clues about research facilities. Next, he reveals that one of these ancient laboratories was built right beneath the great capital. The young man adds that he is searching for all facilities scattered across the world to continue his quest. Adjusting his posture on the couch, the guy firmly declares that he has only one single goal. Looking at everyone, Jin states that his goal is to completely eradicate the monsters from this vast world. Faced with that impactful revelation, those present remain silent in the grand hall, listening to his words. Breaking the silence, Hardin comments that the story is impressive, and the captain immediately agrees. Smiling serenely, Argus states he will believe the young man, because they share the desire to stop the monsters. However, the nobleman warns the warrior not to spread that secret story to anyone else. The captain adds that people will think he went crazy, and Jin smiles, replying that he knows. Upon hearing this, Hardin declares that if Argus trusts him, he will also believe the warrior. Furthermore, the master adds that someone trying to harm them would never reveal details in such a manner. Suddenly, knocks on the door interrupt the serious conversation held by the three men in the hall. Opening the door, the young maid apologizes to the nobleman for interrupting that conversation. Seeing the staff, Argus stands up, asking if the scheduled time had already arrived. With a smile, the captain addresses the young servants, calling the pair's attention. As the boys answer promptly, young Jin appears wearing a new, elegant, noble outfit. Right after, the luxurious carriage begins moving swiftly through the streets of the capital. The grand, imposing royal castle appears in the distance beneath the clear sky of the city. Escorted by knights, the carriage passes through the main gate of the royal family's fortress. Looking through the window, Jin comments that he will have a formal meeting with the local royal family. Adjusting his gloves, the guy hears Argus asking if he didn't like those new clothes. With a friendly smile, the captain assures him that the elegant clothes suit him perfectly well. He recalls that even the girls at the mansion praised his new look quite a bit. Next, Hardin reveals that the person to be met is the first prince of the kingdom. Argus asks him to understand the necessity of the attire, while the guy finds everything boring. As the carriage moves toward the castle, the warrior hopes to avoid new troubles. Upon entering the castle's grand hall, several armed guards stand lined up along the way. On the other side, more soldiers holding sharp spears maintain a serious posture during the reception. Kneeling before the royal throne, Argus announces that he brought the man responsible for saving the kingdom. Then, the voice coming from the throne calmly orders everyone to raise their heads. Upon hearing the order, the young warrior raises his gaze, maintaining a completely serene posture. Observing the figure in front of him, Jin silently ponders who that man really is. Before them appears the full presence of the first prince of the kingdom, known as Tales of Kermosia. Greeting the authority with respect, the guy states it's an honor and introduces himself as Jin. In the name of his sick father, the prince expresses deep gratitude and praises the great feat. Next, Tails comments that he heard through Argus that the guy came from Kodama village. Upon hearing the nobleman call the village humble, Jin is deeply bothered by that comment. With a smirk, Tails states that he will set formalities aside to get straight to the point. Looking at the young man, the prince firmly demands that he must serve him. Then, the nobleman declares that the guy will serve as a holy knight of the kingdom. Next, the prince firmly demands that the young man serve his kingdom directly. With a smile, Tails adds that the young man will work tirelessly as a holy knight of that kingdom. Faced with this order, Jin simply watches the nobleman, maintaining a completely serious and focused gaze. Next, the prince questions the silence and demands to hear an immediate answer from the young man. Intervening in the conversation, Hardin reminds the prince that they were the ones responsible for bringing him. Next, the veteran adds that it is not right to try to force the warrior to accept that. Calmly, Jin tells the nobleman that he has no intention of staying in that place for long. In response, Tails comments on the work at the academy and declares that it is only temporary. When asked if he is refusing the order, the young man apologizes and confirms that he is. Faced with the refusal, the prince states he has no choice while the guards ready their weapons. Pointing at the group, Tails immediately orders his guards to arrest the young man right there. Furious with the order, Hardin yells, asking the prince the meaning of this. With a dark look, the nobleman reveals that the young man is suspected of treason. The prince explains that the fearsome monsters were hidden behind the sealed door below the academy. Tails adds that rumors say Jin was the one who opened it, making his suspicion only natural. Next, the nobleman mockingly implies that even saving the country might have been an act. Faced with this grave accusation, Hardin reacts immediately, declaring that all of this was completely absurd. Meanwhile, Jin remains in absolute silence, surrounded by the sharp blades of the guards in the hall. Right after, the prince states that he will forgive the whole situation if the young man swears loyalty. With a mocking smile, Tails adds that a refusal will leave him with no other choice. Kneeling on the ground, Argus ponders that the young man arrived just recently and could never be involved. Faced with this, the captain realizes that the leaders should already be aware of this important information. Looking at the guard, the nobleman realizes he was deceived by the choice of that specific escort. Next, Argus notices that those 3rd Squad commanders are completely loyal to the prince. He recognizes that the 4th Squad officers also obey any order from the nobleman. With that, the captain concludes that both would fulfill any absurd order from the prince without hesitation. Thus, he realizes they intended to eliminate Jin from the start in case of a refusal. Speaking again, Tails recalls that the young man was the man who defeated that monster. Next, the nobleman adds that leaving such a strong man free is far too dangerous. Extending his hand, Tails claims to be merciful and declares he will grant one last chance. With an evil glare, Tails directly orders the warrior to swear total loyalty to him. Surrounded by the sharp spears of the guards, the boy remains kneeling in the center of that immense hall. With a somber look, Jin calmly replies that he understands the current situation very well. Quite surprised by the response, the prince questions what real use that promise would have. In response, the young man explains that the promise will be worth nothing if he decides to run away. Staring at the nobleman, Jin states that it seems like just an attempt to force him. Next, the warrior questions if the prince merely wishes to satisfy his desire for control. With that, the boy asks if the nobleman has any hidden intention behind it. At that exact moment, the guard brings his spear close to the young man's neck, telling him to shut up. Annoyed by the words spoken, the soldier yells, asking who he thinks he is talking to. Showing no fear whatsoever, Jin holds the shaft of the spear using only one hand. Applying his massive strength, the young man begins pushing the weapon back with total ease. Quite surprised by the reaction, the guard stammers, not understanding what is happening there. Next, Jin begins to slowly stand up in front of all the frightened guards in the hall. With a single firm movement, the warrior pushes the guard back as he stands up. Next, the warrior throws the guard against the ground with extreme ease and force. Looking at the fallen soldier, Jin calmly asks if he isn't just telling the truth. Faced with that display, Tails watches the scene with an expression of extreme and deep irritation. At that same moment, Argus holds his own head, fearing the terrible consequences of that massive chaos. Irritated by the audacity, the female guardian steps forward, cursing the boy while trying to attack him directly there. However, the woman gets startled as she realizes in shock that her magic doesn't work against him. Next, the guard yells enraged, ordering everyone to capture the boy at that exact moment. With total composure, Jin grabs the opponent's spear and easily blocks the entire attack. Delivering a quick strike, the warrior hurls another soldier into the air with extreme violence. Even surrounded by several enemies, the boy maintains his cold and fully focused glare. Suddenly, Argus draws his sword and interferes in the fight to defend the young man there. Furious at the action, Tails screams, demanding that the captain help contain the invader. However, the captain remains completely firm and refuses to obey that unjust order from the prince. Brandishing his sword alongside Hardin, he takes a stance ready to fight the guards. Looking at the soldiers ahead, Argus calmly warns that he holds no resentment whatsoever. With a dark smile, Tails screams, ordering the guards to bring him dead or alive. Pointing from above, the prince furiously orders his soldiers to capture the boy. Focusing his energy, the warrior activates his power as smoke rises around him. With a swift motion, a beam of energy hits all the soldiers at once. Appearing behind Tails, Jin remarks that the nobleman isn't wrong to consider him dangerous. As the guards look around in shock, the young man adds that destroying the city would be very easy. Next, the boy explains that he doesn't do it because he only wishes to protect and help everyone. Facing the scene, Jin firmly declares that he came to protect the inhabitants of the current world. Watching the frightened prince, the warrior adds that nevertheless, there are some important exceptions. With a cold look, Jin warns that he will show no mercy against villains who cause harm. Whispering into his ear, the boy asks which side Prince Tails is truly on. With a serious look, Jin declares that he will never show mercy to villains who harm others. Whispering in the noble's ear, the young man asks which category Prince Tails falls into. Faced with that direct threat, Tails remains completely paralyzed as he begins to sweat in pure terror. Furious at his audacity, the female guardian draws her sword and asks if the boy knows what he is doing. In response, Jin firmly states that he is merely resisting those who impose absurd demands. Fallen on the ground, the guard fearfully asks if the young man plans to become an enemy of the country. Staring intently at everyone, Jin replies that he is not the one making enemies in that place. Observing the scene, Hardin tells the prince that he would show respect if he acted like royalty. Next, Argus adds that he would gladly help if the kingdom's orders were sensible. Jin continues declaring that he will never quietly submit to absurd demands like those. As the guard trembles on the ground, the young man asks if they will complain if he decides to fight back. Before acting, Jin makes sure to ask something very important to that noble leader. The young man questions if Tails is just a fool believing everything will go his way. With his gaze fixed on the noble, Jin completes the question by asking if he could be something else. Keeping a cold expression, the warrior stares at his opponent with his eyes glowing intensely blue. Suddenly, the doors to the hall burst open, and a female voice interrupts the entire conversation. Walking calmly along the red carpet, the new visitor advances while firmly continuing her speech. Next, the young noblewoman appears smiling and asks if she can also join that important meeting. Faced with the arrival of the noble visitor, the vast hall remains in complete silence as everyone watches. Seeing her there, Hardin utters the name of young Lady Charlotte with great surprise and respect. Sheathing his sword, Captain Argus sighs in relief, knowing they arrived in time. Looking at the noblewoman, the captain whispers under his breath that he will leave the rest to her. With a smile, Charlotte Cormosia asks her brother if he is having a lot of fun there. Gnashing his teeth, Tails merely struggles to repeat his sister's name in front of everyone. With a fixed and attentive gaze, the prince watches the young noblewoman in absolute and deep silence. Seeing the guards retreat from the attack, Argus murmurs to himself that the situation has finally changed. Next, Charlotte declares that her noble brother should have invited her to welcome that great hero. The young woman adds that he is not even acting as their father's official representative. Faced with that direct statement from the young woman, the prince gnashes his teeth again without answering a word. Then, Tails states seriously that the man present there is no great hero. Next, Tails furiously claims that the young man is a criminal threatening the royal family. Hearing this, the fallen guard adds that the young man hurt the squad commander himself. In response, young Charlotte asks if that didn't happen because they acted disrespectfully. Pointing at the young man, the soldier shouts that he is about to harm the prince. Looking at the scene, the noblewoman mockingly asks if he isn't just standing behind him. Smiling quite calmly, she turns to Jin and asks if that wasn't true. With a calm smile, the warrior confirms that he only stopped behind him to ask a question. Turning to her brother, Charlotte relays his words and questions the noble's attitude. With a radiant smile, the young woman asks directly if he would really be someone so petty. Faced with that insinuation, the prince merely grinds his teeth tightly while trembling in silence. Turning her attention back to Jin, the lady resumes the conversation in a very elegant manner. Bowing, Charlotte does not demand servitude, but asks for friendly help should the kingdom need it. With a calm smile on his face, the young man promptly replies that he will gladly help. Clapping her hands happily, the lady thanks him and suggests they not continue the conversation in that place. Next, Charlotte begins to walk, proposing they change locations while the guards remain fallen. With an elegant gesture, Charlotte declares she will escort her new friend and orders the guards to stand down. Embarrassed by the situation, the female guardian lowers her head and promptly replies that she understood the order. Observing the scene, the prince grinds his teeth in anger at being unable to stop that group. Next, the carriage leaves the castle, while Argus admits he was quite tense during the meeting. Curious, the captain asks why the young man acted that way, and he replies that it was intuition. Then, Jin recalls the prince's strange presence and hopes it is just his imagination. Even so, the warrior keeps his gaze fixed while trying to understand the nobility's true intentions. Smiling serenely, Charlotte states that there is no need for thanks for the help provided. The young noblewoman apologizes for the treatment given to the hero, but the young man assures her that everything is fine. Then the young woman formally introduces herself, revealing that she is the second princess named Charlotte in that kingdom. The princess wishes to maintain a good friendship with the young man, and he agrees with a nod. Intrigued, Argus questions the prince's behavior, while the princess admits she does not know his intentions. Then, Charlotte adds that her brother is a very ambitious man in his pursuit of power. The young woman explains that upon taking the throne, he intends to declare war to expand their territory. The noblewoman concludes that her brother likely considered Jin's existence an obstacle for him. Clapping her hands, Charlotte assures that she will not let her brother lay a single finger on him. Furthermore, the noblewoman adds that the veteran will report what happened to the king to contain her brother. With a firm gaze, Charlotte declares that she also does not intend to hand over the throne to her brother. Looking at the warrior, the young princess asks if Jin believes in her true intentions. With a slight smile, the young man calmly replies that he agrees and accepts that important alliance. As the carriage moves along the road, Argus asks where exactly they are heading. Stepping out of the vehicle, Charlotte comments that it would be quite rude to summon someone without offering rewards. Looking at the young man, the princess asks if he has been living in a simple inn. As soon as Jin steps off, the young noblewoman adds that for this reason, she made a decision. With an excited gesture, the princess reveals that she took the liberty of preparing something special. With a radiant smile, Charlotte declares that she prepared that entire place for his use. Observing the area, Jin murmurs in surprise while trying to take in everything he is seeing. Before the group, the luxurious mansion appears, displaying its imposing columns and quite elegant architecture. The princess explains that the property belonged to a noble and tells him to enjoy it. Then, the young man opens the massive wooden doors to explore the interior of the property. Looking at the spacious, well-lit hall, Jin comments in awe about the extreme extravagance of the place. Looking back, the young man asks if he can really keep a place of that size. With a smile, Charlotte reveals that the residence belonged to a count in the recent past. Jin then asks what would happen if the former owner decided to return to the place. Hearing his question, Argus smiles and states that the gift shows how highly he is valued. The captain encourages the warrior not to hesitate and step right in to explore everything. The noble excitedly adds, saying that this place is his new home now. Walking into the dining hall, Jin observes the exquisite table in total silence. Next, the young man moves on to the library, filled with books across its shelves. Placing a hand on his chin, Jin murmurs in understanding as he observes the details around him. Looking at the bedroom, Jin comments that the place is too big for just one person. Hearing this, Argus smiles and replies that he will arrange for some servants to take care of that large mansion. The noble then adds that the two rescued youths would be very happy to work there. When asked if he is sure, Argus states that he already owes many favors to the great warrior. With that, Jin asks if his companion could do him a small favor now. Meanwhile, several soldiers train intensely in the training area of the 7th Division of Holy Knights. In the center of the field, two warriors wield wooden swords while exchanging blows in combat. Right after, the female warrior charges forward swiftly, unleashing a powerful attack against her opponent. Keeping her gaze intensely focused, the young woman centers her full attention on the combat movements. With a heavy impact, the wooden weapons clash violently during the rapid strike. Next, the female warrior delivers a precise blow, disarming her opponent and knocking his weapon into the air. Surprised by her speed, the young man steps back upon seeing the spear held right in front of him. Holding the spear pointed at him, the girl listens as her opponent admits his defeat. Witnessing that impressive victory on the training field, someone begins to applaud the fight. Approaching her, the companion praises Karina's progress, to which she replies that she still has a long way to go. With a thoughtful look, Karina reflects that in the recent attack, she only managed to defeat secondary enemies. At the same time, she remembers that young warrior facing the colossal creature with ease. Extremely frustrated, Karina pulls her own hair, unable to fathom the strength of that so-called inferior species. Suddenly, a soldier shouts loudly to announce the arrival of the commander and Princess Charlotte. Approaching the group, Argus instructs his fighters to continue their training normally. Looking to the side, the female warrior is shocked to see Jin walking alongside them. Gritting her teeth, the young woman shows intense irritation at the young man's presence. Observing the scene, Karina wonders in confusion why he is in that place. At that moment, an attentive servant shows the way to Charlotte, who thanks him with utmost grace. Jin then asks the captain what he expects him to do in this place. Watching the soldiers train, the warrior asks if he should instruct them, instantly receiving a positive confirmation. Facing this, Argus recalls their recent experience to highlight Prince Tails' cruelty. The noble explains that the struggle for the throne creates great uncertainty regarding his next moves. Because of this, the captain emphasizes that only the loyal 7th Division will be able to protect the princess. Finally, Argus asks him to train his troops to face the worst-case scenario. Observing 2 soldiers sparring with wooden swords, Jin carefully evaluates the group. The warrior then notes that those men are indeed very well trained in combat. At the same time, the instructor shouts, demanding a bit more effort from his recruits. Seeing everyone's dedication, Jin acknowledges that the troops undergo quite rigorous daily training. However, the young man notices a major flaw as he watches a soldier hold his sword. Meanwhile, Karina tries to catch her breath, remaining completely exhausted at that moment. Closing his eyes in silence, Jin recalls his own distant past of intense training. The warrior remembers that 100 million years ago, he trained desperately to become a great agent. At that moment, Argus shouts loudly, calling all the soldiers' attention for a gathering. The captain then introduces the young man as a national hero invited to instruct the troops. Argus declares that he will teach them what they lack, and the troops respond with great firmness. With a watchful eye, Jin observes the assembled soldiers, trying to gauge everyone's resolve. As the recruits cheer in awe, the warrior thinks that teaching honest people is fairly easy. However, the young man notices that dealing with the rebellious soldiers will be a huge challenge. Facing the assembled troops, Jin takes a step forward, ready to begin the training. To start, Jin orders everyone to run laps around the perimeter of the training field. Irritated, Karina complains loudly, shouting that they already do that all the time and have plenty of stamina. The female warrior asks if he only came to order them to do something useless, receiving a stern reprimand. Witnessing the disrespect, Argus intervenes, calling the girl by her name in a very serious tone. In light of this, Jin apologizes and proposes a slight change to their physical training approach. Calmly, the young man removes his coat with great confidence and composure. Then, Jin walks firmly to the front of the troops while adjusting his glove. Looking at the girl, the young man asks if the spear is her main weapon, receiving a confirmation. With that, Jin firmly grips a wooden spear, positioning his hand with high precision. Pointing the training weapon at Karina, the young man challenges her to try and land a hit. Jin adds that a single hit will excuse them from running, sparking Princess Charlotte's interest. The warrior points out that they wouldn't accept training from someone they consider weaker than themselves. With a provocative smile, Karina asks if the young man can truly master a spear. Demonstrating great skill, Jin twirls the weapon in the air while replying that it won't be a problem. Resting the spear behind his arms, the warrior takes his stance, ready to start the fight. Faced with that provocative posture, Karina and her companion watch in total shock at his bold audacity. Then, the young man turns his back, keeping the spear ready for the major clash. With a confident look, Jin states that there is no weapon he doesn't know how to handle. Going back 100 million years ago, Jin appears training hard in an indoor environment. With his body covered in sweat, the young man moves the great spear with incredible speed during training. Focused on the exercise, the warrior moves forward, delivering a direct and powerful thrust with the spear. Approaching him, Kagura observes her friend and asks if his current choice was a spear. Catching his breath after the effort, Jin turns to answer the scientist at that moment. Handing him a glass, Kagura asks if the young man has any hobbies other than training. Taking the drink, he mentions old children's shows, but the scientist reinforces his current question. While the young man drinks, Kagura praises the ultimate agent and suggests he get some rest. In response, Jin states he has no time for rest due to constant infiltration missions. The warrior explains that he is usually sent in unarmed, needing to improvise weapons with whatever he finds nearby. For that reason, he concludes he must master any type of weapon to ensure his success. Upon hearing that this increases his chances of survival, Kagura just listens, keeping a quiet moment. With a smile, the scientist promises to invent something so the young man never has to look for weapons again. Back in the present, Karina leaps forward at high speed to deliver her spear strike. With extreme ease, Jin blocks the enemy spear's attack using his own precise movement. With an attentive gaze, the young man focuses his attention completely on every move of his opponent. Next, the two wooden spears clash violently, scattering sparks through the air. Without any difficulty, Jin deflects the young woman's charge, blocking the tip of the enemy weapon. Parrying the blow quickly, the warrior brings his spear to a stop millimeters from her face. Smiling faintly, Jin points out that this was already the girl's 15th consecutive defeat. Faced with that provocation, the young woman grinds her teeth, showing great irritation over her defeat. Refusing to accept defeat, Karina shouts loudly, demanding to try the combat one more time. Charging forward with determination, the girl unleashes another direct attack, but the strike is blocked once more. With agile movements across the training field, the warrior continues trying to hit her opponent. Shouting quite loudly, Karina launches a powerful strike coming from above with her large spear. Blocking the attack, Jin reflects in silence that the girl possesses great reaction speed. Furthermore, the young man acknowledges his opponent's immense strength in every impact received there. Watching the charge, Jin silently deduces that this is the strength of evolved humans. However, the young warrior narrows his eyes, knowing that something is still missing from the attack. With a single, precise movement, the girl's spear is thrown, falling directly onto the ground. With the tip of the spear near her neck, the girl freezes, completely shocked by the blow. Holding the wooden spear, Jin calmly declares that the combat is over for now. Refusing to accept the final outcome, Karina shouts, asserting that she can still keep fighting on the field. Closing his eyes slowly, the young man simply replies that trying to continue would be completely useless. Walking backward, Jin explains that she loses strength because she lacks sufficient physical endurance. Observing the exhausted girl on the ground, the young man concludes that she truly has no endurance. Next, Jin assesses that the young woman compensates for her lack of technique with physical strength. Pondering in silence, the warrior reflects that fighters of this era rely too much on magic. With that, Jin notes that ancient physical preparation standards were much higher. Looking at the fallen warrior, the young man states that she needs to focus on physical training. Quite irritated by that unexpected comment, Karina grinds her teeth, unable to answer a single word. Extending a clean hand, Jin calmly asks if the girl can get up now. Despite being displeased with the situation, the warrior silently acknowledges that she must accept the truth. Looking at the young man before her, Karina mentally admits that he is indeed very strong. Faced with all that realization, the girl remains silent while processing the defeat she suffered. Accepting the help, the young woman takes Jin's extended hand to finally stand up. Next, the warrior turns to the troop and announces the start of the next phase. With that, he asks with a smile if everyone is ready to begin a training run. As night falls, a shadowy bird flies over the tall towers of the royal prison. Shortly after, the mysterious nobleman walks slowly, carrying a lantern down the dark stone corridor. Arriving before the heavy metal bars, the visitor observes the prisoner locked in the cell. Bound with chains and wooden stocks, the old prisoner remains seated on the dark bench. Noticing the visitor's presence, Rudman smiles mockingly, commenting on the man's arrival. Next, the nobleman declares that he wanted to speak directly with the architect of that recent incident. Looking at the captive man, the visitor addresses him directly by his name, Lord Rudman. However, the prisoner merely replies with his head bowed that he has nothing to say. Smiling mockingly, the visitor notices the prisoner's composure and asks if he is still plotting something. In response, Rudman considers the possibility and mentions that he would like to say just one thing. The old prisoner declares that even if he escapes now, the royal family will inevitably be destroyed. Hearing that deeply unsettling revelation, the nobleman holds his chest, surprised by the warning. In response, displaying the glowing amulet, the visitor asks if the prisoner used that power. Shocked by the scene, Rudman questions how the other man managed to obtain that ancient object. Next, the prince explains that the tool is capable of sealing monsters themselves. Right after, the nobleman accuses the prisoner of having caused the recent incident with the weapon. Seeing his nervous reaction, the visitor tells him not to panic now. Next, the prince asks if the prisoner hates the royal family and proposes an alliance. Showing the burning city, Tails asserts that the ruler's naivety will destroy the kingdom. Surprised by the proposal, Rudman questions if the nobleman really wants to destroy his own family. Faced with this, the prince declares that the country must be rebuilt to become stronger. Hearing that vision, the old prisoner remains in absolute silence inside his cell. Smirking, Rudman accepts the proposal, even without promising to crown him as the new king. With a dark smile, Tails demands that the prisoner swear absolute loyalty to him alone. When questioned about loyalty, the nobleman justifies that he fears future betrayal from him. With a subtle smile, the man decides to just use him before discarding him in the end. Next, Rudman accepts the deal and swears his loyalty, promising to put an end to royalty. With a malicious smile, Tails confirms if the prisoner really swore his total loyalty right there. Suddenly, the relic in his hand gleams, emitting an intense, dark purple wave. Struck by that intense energy, the chained man freezes completely in shock. Next, several mysterious symbols appear in the air as the power takes control of his mind. The narration explains that the artifact exerts a powerful hypnotic suggestion upon hearing the phrase. With that, the mind control makes the subject truly believe that he wished to fulfill that order. Fully dominated by the amulet's power, the prisoner remains kneeling before the nobleman at the location. With glowing eyes, Rudman submissively declares that his master's will shall be done. Mocking the man, Tails states that he finds pathetic the attempt of those of inferior blood there. Stepping away from the cell, the nobleman adds that they are merely pawns to be used. Leaning toward the prisoner, Tails declares that neither Charlotte nor the fools will rule the nation. Looking at the castle in the distance, the prince arrogantly asserts that the country belongs to him. Meanwhile, Jin dashes ahead to lead the soldiers' intense physical training. Fast footsteps echo off the stone floor as the intense training run continues. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, Jin smiles and remarks that running is actually great after all. Then, the warrior turns to everyone and suggests wrapping up today's training. Seeing the troops collapsed in exhaustion, Jin comments that they look like they came straight out of a sports manga. Approaching, Argus apologizes for overdoing it, but the young man assures him that it revealed their endurance. The captain explains that they rely on horses and speed magic, which led them to neglect their physical endurance. Standing before the group, Argus declares his wish to focus on endurance, and the young man agrees. Glancing to the side, the warrior changes the subject and asks about her presence. When asked about heading back, Charlotte asks with a smile if she was getting in the way of their training. The young man then warns her that she will end up getting scolded if she does not return home. Approaching respectfully, one of the guards asks Jin for permission to ask a very important question. Rummaging through his bag, the man asks if the warrior has ever seen anything like this before. He then reveals a mysterious watch covered in a very dark energy. Looking at that mysterious object, Jin reacts with great surprise upon recognizing its connection to the laboratory. When asked what it is, the guard reveals that he secretly confiscated it from Professor Ludman. The princess then reveals that the man is considered one of the main culprits behind this. Hearing the explanation, the warrior questions the term invader relic mentioned by the young princess. Charlotte then explains that this unknown artifact grants immense power to its user. Facing all these revelations, Jin remains completely silent as he analyzes the grim situation. Hearing the details about the relic, Captain Argus mutters, unable to believe its existence. Observing the artifact, Jin wonders if it is a machine made from monster parts. Noticing his behavior, the princess states that the young man seems to recognize the object. Then the warrior explains that he destroyed the structure because he found it too dangerous in that location. Hearing the explanation, Argus concludes that the artifact caused the entire recent incident there. Putting the object away, Princess Charlotte praises his decision, saying the enemy would have recovered it. Next, the noble princess adds that she intends to investigate the origins of that mysterious artifact. With that, the princess asks Jin to share any new discoveries, receiving his immediate confirmation. As he watches the group walk away into the sunset, Argus murmurs about the relic. Then, the captain warns about maintaining vigilance to avoid new incidents, receiving a confirmation. Noticing the warrior's demeanor, Argus asks if something happened, and Jin replies with nothing. Observing the trapped monster, Jin wonders if the relic calmed the invaders of the past. Analyzing the large beast in the cell, the young man concludes that they acted of their own free will. Furthermore, the warrior notes that the monster's movements were clearly coordinated with each other. Hearing about this coordination, Argus reacts with surprise, asking if they really acted together. At that moment, Jin remembers Kagura's message warning about the evolution of the beasts. In the old recording, the image of a humanoid monster appears, demonstrating terrifying strength. Facing this, Argus wonders, deeply impressed, if there could be someone capable of commanding such creatures. 4 days later, the headmistress of the imposing academy, opens up about all the trouble faced recently. Then, the lady laments having been detained for a whole week during the investigations. Hearing her complain about her innocence, Argus merely politely thanks her for all her cooperation. The lady ponders that there really were very malicious people hidden inside that great institution. The captain states it was not her fault, but the headmistress insists she should have noticed. With a smile, Jin tells the lady not to worry about that sad event. Next, the headmistress reveals she heard that the young man has no real ties to the Holy Order. The young man confirms the information, while the lady admits her surprise at being saved by him. With a firm movement, the lady rests her hands on the desk and bows slightly. Tilting her head, the headmistress thanks him for protecting the country and her students. Faced with that sincere gesture, Jin merely smiles in a friendly and very calm manner at her. Then, the captain changes the subject as he walks beside the warrior in that corridor. The lady asks if he intends to continue acting as an instructor, even after completing his infiltration. The young man explains that he needed money to travel and intended to work there for a while. Jin adds that he received a good reward for the incident and no longer needs the job. Argus offers to find a replacement for the post, but the headmistress immediately refuses. With a firm gaze, the lady demands that he fulfill all his assumed responsibilities. The lady adds that quitting on the first day would be shameful, leaving both of them with no way to argue back. As she walks ahead, the headmistress assures them she is not saying that out of malice. Looking back with a small smile, the lady asks both of them to follow her. With that, the three continue walking together down the large, elegant corridor of that imposing academy. Thoughtful, Jin takes the opportunity to ask his companion what Gita's fate had been. Hearing that name mentioned, the captain merely smiles quite awkwardly at him. The captain explains that the counselor remains imprisoned, screaming desperately that he is innocent of that accusation. Furthermore, he adds that the prisoner keeps muttering to himself and plotting how to humiliate Jin. Despite the reported suspicious behavior, the young warrior suggests releasing Gita, considering him quite harmless. However, the headmistress argues that he tried to frame him and needs to cool his head longer. Quickly changing the subject, the lady announces that they have finally arrived at their final destination. Then, the woman opens the large door and invites the young man to enter the room. Stepping forward, Jin widens his eyes at that big surprise. Inside the room, the young girl turns around in surprise upon noticing the visitor's arrival. Before everyone, a cheerful crowd of students enthusiastically celebrates Jin's arrival. Facing the scene, the crowd of students celebrates the young man's arrival with great enthusiasm. Quite surprised, Jin asks the reason for that reaction, and the headmistress explains the whole situation. Next, the young students celebrate greatly while commenting on the famous hero's reputation. Observing all that noise, the young noble girl expresses her irritation in absolute silence. Quite annoyed, Milia complains about her classmate's attitude, and the student mocks her words. Suddenly, the young girl runs up to say something very important to the warrior. The girl explains that she had skipped her classes to stroll through the bustling royal city. Next, the young girl reveals that she ended up being surprised by a terrible monster in that place. The girl remembers that she couldn't defend herself alone against that extremely dangerous and terrifying attack. At that critical moment, young Jin appeared, delivering a devastating blow to save the girl. With a swift movement, the warrior eliminated the creature before it could cause any kind of damage. Quite emotional, Kudo cries tears of joy while expressing her deep gratitude to her great savior. Right after, other students also approach, thanking him for the help received during the battle. Observing that sudden affection, the young man simply listens to everyone, maintaining a very serene posture. Smiling broadly, the headmistress touches Jin's shoulder to conclude her brief explanation. The lady asks him to teach the students as an instructor, even if only occasionally. Faced with the sincere request, the young man just smiles faintly, agreeing to help that class. The memory flashes back to 100 million years ago, showing the city completely devastated under the rain. In that distant era, Jin appears heavily injured while questioning the origin of the terrible mutant monsters. Next, Kagura explains that the government made that name official to designate the fearsome beasts. In the room, the team members comment that the name fits monsters born from degradation. The scientist adds that these beasts can only act in regions with a high level of pollution. Hearing that important revelation, his comrade asks in surprise about the true meaning of those harsh words. The image shows the earth covered in fog, revealing that there is no place left for humanity. Faced with that terrible reality, the young man just keeps his head down in absolute thoughtful silence. Approaching with a smile, Sana Sakuma comments that seeing Jin like that is a rare thing. Next, his colleague Kazama agrees and asks where all his usual self-confidence has gone. With a serious look, the young man replies that this time they aren't facing ordinary humans. The warrior adds that the enemy consists of monsters that not even missiles can destroy. Hearing that somber explanation, his colleague remains apprehensive, unable to answer anything at that moment. Approaching the young man, his comrade calls Jin's name to try to catch his attention. Next, the woman squeezes his cheeks tightly to try to cheer the young man up. Smiling broadly, the girl reminds him that he is the strongest agent in the entire nation. Holding the young man's face, she tells him to keep his usual confident expression. While drinking, Kagura states that the monsters will succumb as soon as nature is fully purified. The scientist explains that the science division is developing a device to restore the planet. Next, he adds that humanity just needs to hold out firm until the apparatus is ready. With determination, the girl guarantees that they just need to contain the beasts as they have always done. Hearing that statement from his comrade, Jin just watches in silence, maintaining his utter calm. Smiling broadly, the girl agrees with the young man and states that he is completely right. Suddenly, the memory shows the warrior fallen and bleeding heavily under the pouring rain. At the same time, another comrade collapses severely wounded, unable to rise from the wet ground. Before that destroyed city, the young warrior remains standing, completely surrounded by fallen comrades. Lacking the strength to continue, the young man collapses to his knees in the mud under the rain. With his face covered in blood, Jin watches the devastation with a look of sheer pain. Seeing him approach, Sana asks in a very faint voice if it was him there. Seeing her comrade, the girl comments that he had survived, considering that completely expected. Holding her hand, the young man insists on treating her wounds, but she says it's too late. Squeezing his hand tightly, the young girl asks Jin to listen to her message. Struggling greatly to breathe, the girl asks only that the warrior never give up. Hearing those final words, Jin promises to keep fighting until his very last moment of life. Under the intense rain, the young man remains kneeling, holding his comrade's lifeless body. Turning on the communicator, the young man asks if Kagura hears him and receives a positive response. Next, he agrees to undergo the nano-machine experiment, and the scientist questions his certainty. Kagura warns about the risk of death, but the young man replies that he will die fighting anyway. Carrying his comrade's body, Jin firmly declares that he won't give up the fight. Suddenly, the warrior wakes up startled in his bed after reliving that painful memory. Still catching his breath, the young man runs a hand through his hair while trying to calm down. Then, Jin looks at the 2 message cubes placed on the bedroom table. Reaching out his hand, the young man holds the luminous object to analyze its recorded content. Watching the projection, Jin quietly declares that he has never forgotten his promises. Then, the image of the team appears as the young man promises to reclaim a world free of corruptors. Meanwhile, a shout for a messenger echoes through the fortress city of Melmos in the distant kingdom. Running in a great hurry, the soldier informs his superior that a grave emergency has just arisen. The soldier reports that the enemy is advancing from the north, but the Grand Master states he already knows. Gazing at the horizon, Glen O's solemnly declares that he can already see the opponents approaching. Before the city walls, a gigantic horde of monsters advances, covering that entire vast region. At the same time, several mutant creatures of different shapes charge en masse, roaring violently. Then, flying and land monsters advance together, making loud noises across that entire area. Terrified by the number of enemies, the soldier states it will be difficult, and asks what they will do. Without hesitation, Glen O's merely mumbles as he begins to concentrate a large sphere of energy. Then, the master leaps from the wall and fires a devastating beam toward the ground. With the impact of the attack, a devastating wave of energy hits and eliminates several monsters. As he watches the scene, the Grand Master widens his eyes, realizing they were disintegrated. Then, Glen O's orders the soldier to inform the king while assuring him he will hold off the enemies. With that, Glen O's wonders if the corruptors nullify magic and notices the unprecedented pack. Then, a mysterious dark figure appears leading the massive creatures from behind the smoke. Faced with that presence, the question arises as to what is truly happening with the corruptors. Jin arrives at the Grand Library of the royal capital to conduct his research on the New World. Inside the building, the young man carefully analyzes 2 open books on the wooden table. Staring intently, Jin comments that there is less information about the corruptors than he imagined. Reading the ancient text, he notices only brief records about the emergence of these fearsome creatures. Looking at the illustration, Jin wonders if these monsters are hiding or born out of nowhere. Walking through the shelves, the young man considers it absurd for such beings to appear in such a clean environment. Flipping through the pages, Jin concludes that Kagura is the only clue to finding detailed answers. While deciding his next destination, the warrior hears an angry shout scolding someone nearby. Faced with the sudden noise, Jin looks to the side, not understanding the reason for all the commotion. Observing the library, he notices a group of students gathered around a table. Looking closely, Jin recognizes the girl and remembers she was with Hakama. Annoyed, the other student openly states that the girl's presence bothers everyone there. While the young girl claims she has permission, the aggressor slams her foot on the table, shouting angrily. Next, the furious student asks how she will take responsibility if she transmits that disease. Accusing the frightened girl, the aggressor asserts that she is the true culprit behind the disease. Seeing that injustice, the young man closes his book and decides he needs to step in immediately. Suddenly, an elegant voice emerges, saying everyone seems to be having a lot of fun there. Accompanied by her guards, Princess Charlotte calmly asks them to lower their noise in the library. Startled by the illustrious presence, the young aggressor turns around, exclaiming the noblewoman's name. As the student tries to justify herself, the princess asks if she will need to repeat her previous request. Making a shushing gesture, Charlotte reinforces the order to maintain calm in that room. While the girls hurriedly flee, the noblewoman squats down, asking if the student is okay. The young girl thanks her for the help, and the princess replies that there is no cause for concern. Watching the scene from afar, the warrior smiles, commenting that the young woman arrived before him. Looking to the side, Charlotte notices the young man's presence and reacts quite surprised. Greeting him with a bow, the princess comments on the happy coincidence of their meeting. Questioned about her presence, Charlotte explains that she often frequents the place to expand her knowledge. Pulling a book from the shelf, the noblewoman adds that the collection surpasses that of the royal castle. Turning around with the book in hand, Charlotte asks if the warrior was also researching something there. The young man confirms and explains he was choosing his next destination, prompting the princess to ask about the location. Pointing to the map, Jin explains that he intends to head to the region expanding to the northeast. Upon hearing his choice, the princess asks if he is referring to the territory of Plutza and Melmos. At that mention, the girl becomes flustered and exclaims that the young man should not go there. Turning to the young girl, Charlotte calmly asks what the real reason for such a warning would be. Holding her own chest, the student explains that no one can fight against a dangerous disease. Hearing about the illness, Jin reflects that falling sick in that era poses a massive risk. Next, the princess introduces Kudo Plutza as the heiress of the region he intends to visit. The narration details that the young girl belongs to an influential family tied to the royal bloodline. When asked about the plague, Charlotte answers that it will be much faster to show him in person. While the student shows apprehension, the noblewoman firmly states that a strong warrior will be fine. Turning to the warrior, the young princess politely asks if he would like to accompany her now. Shortly after, the imposing castle of Kurmosia stands out under the clear sky of the kingdom. Guiding the visitor through the fortress corridors, Charlotte points out the correct path for the group. Opening the chamber curtains, the princess reveals the room where the king rests sick. Faced with that sudden entrance, those present in the room react with surprise at the group's arrival. Tidying up the environment, Charlotte introduces the sick young girl as the third princess of the kingdom. Next, young Paris appears lying in bed groaning in pain, extremely weakened. Observing the patient's condition, Jin's eyes widen as he recognizes those old symptoms. Right after, dark spots and strange marks appear, spreading across the girl's neck. The noblewoman explains that the terrible disease is spreading through Melmos and reaching the royal capital as well. Given this, the narration reveals that the death toll already exceeds thousands of victims. Charlotte adds that the infected suffer from a scorching fever and agonizing body aches. Furthermore, the princess regretfully states that the terrible illness always ends in death. In silence, Jin confirms to himself that the disease is corruption syndrome. Kneeling by the bed, the noblewoman explains that the evil causes extremely rapid cellular mutation. With that, the narration recalls that this epidemic devastated the planet 100 million years ago. Seeing them approach, the doctor advises Charlotte to keep her distance due to contagion. Listening to the advice, the warrior learns that people with divine power possess resistance to the disease. The noblewoman adds that the Grand Master of the Holy Knights was sent there for that reason. Understanding the situation, Jin concludes that his nanomachines eliminate the pathogen from the body. When questioned, the girl confirms she was not affected because she also possesses divine power. Next, She laments that she might have been responsible for bringing the disease to the royal capital. Kudo adds that the sick young girl lacked such strength and likely fell ill because of her. Intervening in the conversation, Charlotte states that it is not her fault, as she arrived before the epidemic. Holding her shoulders affectionately, the noblewoman tells the girl to stop blaming herself. Charlotte promises to find the cure soon, but the court doctor doubts that possibility. The man explains that the doctors themselves are falling ill because almost none possess divine power. Faced with this, the doctor declares that all potential carriers must be isolated in quarantine. In response, Charlotte counters that without a quick cure, the whole country will be destroyed first. Observing the entire argument, Jin seriously states that any current attempt will be completely useless. The young man explains that the disease stems from a parasitic infection of invisible corruptors in the blood. With that, the young man takes a few steps forward, approaching the girl lying on the bed. Suddenly, Jin begins concentrating his energy, generating several sparks around his body. Quite terrified, the court doctor shouts, asking what the warrior intends to do. Faced with that intense glow, Charlotte calls the young man's name with great concern and surprise. With energy gathered in his hand, Jin calmly asks the doctor to step away from there. Terrified by the energy, the doctor screams, trying to stop the young man from touching the princess. As the girl gasps in pain, the narration recalls that there is no cure for corruption. Next, Jin states that there is still hope if the patient belongs to this current era. Seeing the procedure begin on the sick girl's body, Charlotte immediately calls out for her young sister. Faced with this, the doctor grabs the young man's shoulder and yells about touching royalty. Looking back, Jin responds by asking if he can take care of her since the doctor cannot. Next, the young man points out that normally, this terrible disease causes death within 3 days. Watching the scene, Charlotte and the young companion observe the application of that energy together. Focusing his own energy, Jin declares that in this case there is still a great chance. The warrior explains that he needs to stop the monster's regeneration, even if it overloads the body. Then, the young man raises his other hand to concentrate a new type of energy. Placing his hand on the girl's head, he adds that he also needs to stimulate her recovery. With a completely fixed gaze, Jin maintains the process, concentrating all his strength right there. Suddenly, the princess screams loudly as the energy envelops her entire body. Drawing his sword, the doctor shouts, asking if the young man is trying to kill the princess. Faced with the confusion, Charlotte tells the doctor to step back, but he refuses to retreat. Advancing highly agitated, the man yells, ordering the young man to get away from the princess. Meanwhile, Jin remains crouching, concentrating his energy without paying attention to the incoming attack. Without shifting his focus, the young man simply asks if the man really won't back down. Desperate at the response, the doctor shouts that he has no choice and strikes. Suddenly, a swift slash cuts through the air, and blood spatters across the room. Faced with the violence of that scene, Princess Charlotte covers her mouth, completely shocked right there. At the same time, the young companion watches the moment with her hands on her chest in fear. Completely paralyzed by that outcome, the doctor trembles violently, unable to say a single word. Without suffering any damage, Jin seriously asks the man why he won't stop. The warrior explains that the young princess is currently fighting the monsters internally. Hearing that major revelation, all the witnesses in the room watch the young man in utter shock. The warrior adds that the power works inside the sick girl to eradicate the entire infection. He then warns that interrupting the healing will render all the girl's effort useless. Concentrated, Jin considers that controlling the electrical charge is essential to avoid harming the girl. Next, the young man thinks he just needs to trust the proper functioning of his own nano-machines. Concentrating all his divine power, the young man keeps a firm focus to finish the treatment. With that, the terrible infection marks slowly begin to fade from the young girl's neck. At that moment, the princess brings her glowing hands close to help treat the sick girl. Then, Charlotte earnestly begs Jin to save her beloved younger sister. Seeing the noblewoman's determination, the doctor states he will accept whatever punishment he receives later. Hearing this, the princess tells them not to worry about punishments and begs for immediate help. Charlotte then asks if he has mastered healing magic, and the doctor promptly confirms it. With that, everyone gathers around the bed, applying their healing magic together. Concentrating all his divine power, the doctor gives his absolute best to save Paris. At the same time, the young girl also uses all her power to assist right there. As the hours pass, the dark night gives way to the dawn of a new day. With the sunrise, the three collapse exhausted from the immense effort made throughout the night. At that moment, the recovering young girl begins to regain consciousness and slowly opens her eyes. Suddenly, Paris wakes up fully recovered and looks around in surprise, not understanding what happened. Looking at her affectionately, Jin softly asks if the young girl was already awake at that moment. Quite confused, the girl asks who he is, while Charlotte tearfully calls her name. Running over, the princess asks if she is in pain, while the young girl responds by calling her sister. Turning to the side, Jin calmly states that the young girl will be completely fine from now on. Impressed, the doctor recalls that the young girl could not even sit up for the past 2 weeks. Bowing his head, the man asks how he can ever apologize for everything he caused there. Smiling, Jin replies that he is quite durable and advises the man to train his strength more. The young man adds that otherwise, the doctor would never be able to pierce his body with the blade. Next, Princess Charlotte slowly approaches and softly calls out the name of their great savior. Bowing deeply, the princess declares that the royal family owes him an unpayable debt. With tears in her eyes, Charlotte vows that she will always be by his side, no matter what the future holds. Asking her to raise her head, Jin notices young Paris looking timidly at him. Embarrassed by the whole situation, the girl hides her face behind the bed blanket. Seeing her companion approach, Paris happily gets up and immediately calls her by name. Crying with emotion, Kudo asks if her friend is truly all right, receiving a joyful confirmation. Excited by the result, the doctor tells the princess that they need to spread this treatment right away. With eyes sparkling with joy, the young girl celebrates that they will also be able to save their homeland. However, Jin refuses and seriously states that this alone will not be enough for everyone. When questioned, the young man recalls that the cause of this terrible disease remains the corruptors. He then firmly declares that they need to destroy the source spreading this illness. The warrior adds that he already planned to go there, but now he has another great reason. With that, rising from the chair, Jin invites everyone to set off and eliminate the source of the disease. Meanwhile, the great fortress city of Melmos appears entirely covered in dense, dark smoke. In the shadows of destruction, the mysterious figure laments that almost all of his pawns have been eliminated. Fallen and injured on the ground, Glenos tries to lean against the bloody stone wall. Severely wounded and bleeding heavily, the veteran stares at the invader and asks who he really was. Enveloped in a dark aura, the mysterious individual questions whether he is a real human. Next, the shadowy figure suggests to his companion that they could make use of that wounded warrior. Adjusting his glasses, the other fellow agrees and states that the man seems to be very useful. With a dark smirk, the man with glasses concludes that they should take him along with them. A week later, Jin and the knights continue riding together along a long desert road. As they draw closer, Argus asks if a simple piece of cloth will really be able to protect everyone. Next, the young man replies that the protection serves more to bring some peace of mind. Worried, Jin questions if it is safe to leave the royal capital unprotected during this trip. Hearing this, the veteran explains that the request for reinforcements came directly from the Grand Master. Argus adds that a call for help from him indicates a truly national crisis. Right after, the girl excitedly alerts the group that they have finally reached the destination. Pointing forward, Kudo indicates the great fortress and reveals it to be her homeland, Melmos. As they enter the city, everyone observes the partially destroyed buildings and the residents working together. Observing the area, Argus comments on having heard that a huge horde of monsters attacked there. The captain points out that the damage was minimal thanks to the protection of the local Grand Master. Next, the captain instructs the female knight to lead a squad to treat the wounded. Right after, he asks Kudo to arrange a formal meeting with the lord of the city. As he walks through the streets, Jin attentively observes a resident with visible marks of the recent infection. Looking around, the young warrior worries as he notices the large number of infected people. Walking up to the entrance of the location, Jin states that the cause of the infection is definitely in there. As they advance through the courtyard, they observe the grand structures of the castle heavily damaged by battle. Right after, the group settles onto the hall sofa to await the lord. Hearing footsteps, the man enters the room and thanks everyone for the long journey. At that moment, the girl stands up, startled, and calls out in surprise to her own father. With tears in her eyes, Kudo gets emotional seeing the state he was in. Greatly weakened by illness, Gajin Plutsa asks with difficulty why his daughter returned. Next, the Lord reminds her that the young girl already knew about the tragic situation of that land. Lacking the strength to stand, the man collapses onto the sofa with much assistance. Looking at the group, Gajin states that he was already aware of all the recent rumors. Bowing respectfully, Argus states that he feels honored to meet that lord. Next, the lord asks about the Grand Master and reveals that he has gone missing. Quite surprised by the revelation, the captain asks in disbelief if he really disappeared there. The man details that a week ago, a giant horde of monsters invaded from the north. He adds that the Grand Master wiped out the enemies, but ended up disappearing after the battle. Listening to the story, Gajin reveals that the Grand Master was defeated by a humanoid monster. Given this information, the warrior remembers the dangerous threat posed by that evolved creature. Next, Argus asks what really happened afterward to the master and the monsters. Upon learning that the leader was taken away, the captain is shocked by such overwhelming enemy strength. Suddenly, Gajin starts coughing up blood violently while his daughter screams in deep concern. Catching his breath, the weakened lord states that he has a very urgent request for the captain. The lord asks to evacuate the healthy residents of that region to the southern territory. He explains that the terrible disease has spread too much for them to use the place as a front line. In his grave condition, the lord laments that it is impossible to predict when the enemies will attack again. Looking at the young warrior, Argus asks if he could heal that severely sick lord right there. With total confidence, Jin calmly replies that this will be no problem at all for him to do. Hearing that unexpected statement, Gajin remains in shock, asking if he will really be cured right there. Observing the young man, the curious lord interrupts the conversation, asking what his true identity is. Making a slight bow in respect, the young man formally introduces himself, saying he is Shidu Jin. The young man adds that he teaches magic at the academy, leaving the lord perplexed, coming from an inferior species. Placing his hand on his chest, the lord sighs deeply while trying to regain his strength. Then, Gajin vents, stating that this terrible disease is completely impossible to cure. Observing the lord, the young man reflects that even those with divine power ended up in that state. The explanation shows that many microscopic monsters invade the body and overcome any divine resistance. With that, he understands that the entire region is severely contaminated by small mutant monsters. Adjusting his glove, Jin ponders that healing him will do no good without eliminating the monsters in the air. Faced with this conclusion, the warrior kneels down slowly to touch the floor of that large room. Looking at the warrior, the girl calls him Professor, while he asks for complete calm. Next, the young man declares that he will use that central point to begin the plan. Quite surprised by that posture, the sick lord asks what the young man intends to do. While preparing, the young man hesitates for a moment, asking himself if he can really accomplish that. However, Jin tells himself that he must be fully capable of succeeding. Concentrating all his power, he orders the surrounding energy to gather there. With that, countless points of light begin to emerge and float across the entire region. At the same time, an immense wave of light advances from the Great Valley straight toward that castle. Spreading across the vast green fields, the points of light begin to purify the entire surrounding region. While activating the power, Jin recalls that in the recent incident, he was quite helpless against scattered targets. Because of this, the warrior states that he needs to become capable of dominating wide-scale battles. Next, the young man explains that he will gather the scattered nanomachines to take full control. At the same time, the lights envelop the injured residents among the ruins of that large city. Looking up, an infected boy watches in great astonishment as the glows appear in the air. Seen from above, the wave of light spreads rapidly, covering all the buildings in the vast territory. Impressed by the scene, Gajin Plutsa stands up, startled from the couch upon witnessing that intense energy. While sustaining the magic, Jin gnashes his teeth as the weight of the strain affects his body. With his vision blurred from exhaustion, the young man loses his strength and collapses straight onto the floor. Worried about the fall, Argus and the girl rush over to him, shouting his name. Composing himself slowly, the warrior states that he is fine, but admits to having pushed his body too hard. Quite confused, Gajin asks what was done, and Jin replies that he gathered the local spirits. Smiling with relief, Argus and Kudo listen to the young man affirm that no one else will fall sick in that place. Given this explanation, Gajin remains in shock that he controlled spirits on such a scale. Looking at the young man, the Lord silently wonders who that mysterious man really is. With that, a gigantic dome of pure light expands, engulfing the entire great fortress. Watching the luminous barrier from afar, the villain mutters in surprise about what happened in his absence. Next, the figure questions his partner upon noticing all the spread sickness disappearing from the place. Stepping forward into the dust, his companion answers that the solution to that is obvious. With a dark smile, the man with glasses declares that they simply must stop the invaders. Meanwhile, in the city of Melmos, Medical tents remain set up to provide full care. Inside the quarters, several local healers use their magic to treat the sick in their beds. Concentrating all her divine power, the healer performs the treatment with extreme dedication and care. Because of this, medical care across the entire city continues to progress extremely smoothly. In the room, Argus explains that the infection among the population should completely disappear within a month. Impressed by the news, Gajin states in shock that he can hardly believe something so incredible. After receiving the Lord's sincere thanks, Jin replies with a smile, telling him not to worry. Looking at his daughter, Gajin comments that her master is incredible, and Kudo cheerfully agrees. However, the young man seriously warns that they cannot relax until they eliminate the root cause. Upon hearing the warning, Gajin curiously asks if the warrior has any clues about the matter. Gajin explains that the disease began to spread as soon as the corruptors invaded that region. The Lord adds that the monsters only broke through the defense when the Grand Master was captured. Hearing this, Jin deduces that the cause of the epidemic must have been present there long before. Thoughtful, the Lord counters by stating they never received reports of suspicious presences in that vast region. Suddenly, the man's eyes widen as he remembers a very important detail. Gajin reveals there is one place they did not investigate, and Argus asks what place that would be. With a serious look, the Lord begins to reveal what this unverified spot might be. Before his companions, the man finally reveals that the unverified place is the underground. Hearing this unexpected revelation, Jin reacts quite surprised, keeping his gaze completely fixed. Next, the whole group hurriedly goes down the long stone staircase toward the underground. Illuminating the path with a torch, they continue advancing together through the dark underground passage. Looking ahead, the warrior suddenly stops upon noticing something extremely disturbing there. Before them emerges the imposing door of another ancient research facility built by Kagura. Holding the torch, the Lord explains that this was the only place not yet verified. The man adds that no one has ever been able to open the gate, and Argus calls for Jin. Placing his hand on the structure, the system recognizes Jin's authority to open the door. Then the heavy door slowly opens, revealing the interior before the entire group. Deeply shocked, the Lord exclaims that the passage had never yielded to any previous attempt. Staring at the young warrior, the man asks in surprise who he really is after all. Without offering explanations, Jin merely replies that now they must check the interior of the place. With that, the group advances together to explore the immense dark chamber of that ancient underground. Catching sight of the scene ahead, Kudo covers her mouth, frightened by the resulting smoke. Observing the area, Argus states that the warrior's hunch was entirely correct at that moment. Watching closely, the young man observes the grave scene, maintaining a completely serious posture. Before the large pulsing machine, Jin declares that it is a weapon belonging to the corruptors. At that very moment, the structure begins to spew dense smoke from one of its pipes. Next, several small mutant monsters emerge from the smoke, invading the large chamber. Reacting quickly, the young warrior raises his hand and manifests a powerful protective shield on the spot. Protected by the barrier, Argus declares without a doubt that the machine is the cause of everything. In shock, Kudo wonders why something so dangerous was hidden in that place. Looking at the structure, Jin realizes that the situation is exactly the same as in the royal capital. With that, the young man remembers the giant monster and questions who brought that to the underground. Concentrating his divine power, Jin declares he will destroy the device to avoid repeating past mistakes. Next, the warrior fires a beam of light with full force toward the machine. Observing that swift action, Argus follows everything closely, maintaining a completely attentive posture. Suddenly, the noble captain's eyes widen upon hearing an order to stop immediately. Reacting quickly, Argus shouts a warning about the danger and leaps forward to protect the warrior. Landing firmly on the ground, the captain channels his energy as he prepares for combat. With that, several spikes of dark energy surge forward with great violence against both of them in that underground. Wielding his blade, Argus delivers a precise slash and destroys the attack in midair. The captain keeps his gaze fixed on the threat while raising his energized sword. At that same moment, the blade glows intensely as it gathers a massive amount of energy. Advancing with great agility, Argus leaps straight toward the large machine to try to destroy it. With a powerful impact, the blade strikes the structure, causing a heavy explosion of energy. Meanwhile, a dangerous sphere of dark energy begins gathering in the enemy's hands. Suddenly, a devastating wave of dark energy fires from above toward the warriors. Before that overwhelming glow, the captain freezes completely upon sensing the power of the strike. Without hesitating, Jin lunges forward and raises a barrier to block the attack. With the defense set, the young warrior immediately demands to know who is attacking from above. Right after, slow footsteps echo through the air as the invader floats down to the ground. Before the group appears, a shadowy, red-eyed figure gathering a rather devastating energy. Surprised by that sudden appearance, Argus shouts, asking who that mysterious figure in that place could be. At that moment, the invader adjusts his aim and fixes his gaze on the young warrior. Walking slowly forward, a voice remarks that he thought there was only one major threat there. Then, the man with glasses observes those present and is surprised to see the young man. Upon seeing the figure before him, Jin freezes in shock, unable to believe it. Before him appears his former scientist friend Kagura, standing right beside the creature. Faced with that unbelievable sight, the young warrior asks if that is some kind of joke. Then the young man calls out Kagura's name as he recognizes his former companion there. Observing the scientist in front of him, Jin gnashes his teeth while keeping a very serious glare. Faced with this intense reaction, the man with glasses merely observes the warrior with total serenity. With a smirk, Kagura comments that he seems to have many questions to ask. Next, the scientist adds that he will explain the situation in a way that is easy to understand. Staring intently at the whole group, Kagura states that things work in that exact manner. Right after, the scientist turns to observe a giant sphere of dark energy pulsing. Looking to the side, Kagura follows all movement in that chamber while maintaining a completely calm posture. Suddenly, the mysterious monster raises its arms to manage to block the energy attack. Adjusting his glasses, the scientist comments with a smile that the young warrior continues acting fast as always. While Argus is surprised by the defense, the scientist states that was a rude greeting. Facing his rival, Jin firmly declares that he is not Kagura, receiving a provocative doubt in return. Raising his hand, he questions how he would know so much if he were not the same known person. When asked by Argus about the man's identity, Jin reluctantly admits the truth. Adjusting his glasses, the scientist confirms that the warrior is an ancient from his same era. Worried about the danger, the captain orders the two companions to evacuate the location immediately. While the companions retreat quickly, Jin demands that the scientist explain what he is doing. Looking at the pulsing structure, the warrior asks what he intends to do with that. Smirking, Kagura replies that he is doing the same thing he used to do back in those days. With the mutant master behind him, the scientist adds that everything is nothing more than an experiment. Observing the dark figure, Argus questions in shock if that could be what he thought. Facing the energized monster, the captain recognizes with horror the presence of the Grand Master there. Right after, the creature brandishes its large energized sword ready for combat. With extreme speed, the mutant warrior rushes forward, launching a powerful attack against his opponents. Struck by the impact, Argus curses angrily while trying to contain the advance of the strong opponent. Charging forward furiously, the captain demands to know what the scientist did to the master. At that moment, the opponent stomps hard on the ground, preparing another massive attack move. Leaping toward the opponent, the monster delivers a devastating strike coming from above with its sword. Without hesitating, Jin blocks the lightning attack using all his strength to contain the blade. Focusing his energy into his fist, the young man pushes the heavy blade back with all his strength. Right after, he delivers a powerful direct blow to the chest of the strong mutant enemy. Upon receiving the impact, the opponent's eyes glow intensely as he resists the pain. Without losing his rhythm, Jin lands a devastating kick right below the beast's chin. With the devastating impact of the attack, the powerful rival is hurled backward through the air. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the young man rushes swiftly through the chamber to maintain pressure in combat. Focusing his attention entirely on the enemy, Jin keeps his eyes glowing, fixed on the threat ahead. However, the creature quickly crosses its sharp blades to manage to contain that new strike. Glare at the young man furiously. The mutant warrior demonstrates truly terrifying physical endurance. Next, he stomps hard on the stone floor to regain his balance. Trapped in that intense clash, Jin observes impressed by the amount of strength the opponent possesses. At the same time, the monster wonders impressed how that sword had not broken. Right after, the beast retreats by leaping backward to create a safe distance there. Upon landing on the ground, the creature turns to Kagura, commenting that he forgot to ask. The monster asks if he can destroy him, but the scientist coldly replies that he should not do so. Next, the scientist reminds him that he had already warned that the young man was the chosen one. Faced with this revelation, the dark being wonders in surprise if that young man could be the vessel. Hearing that strange expression, Jin silently questions what its true meaning could be. Next, the young man asks if he created the weapons, and the scientist confirms with a smile. Hearing the confirmation, the warrior hesitates for a moment before proceeding with his words. With a firm gaze, Jin declares that he is not Kagura, just someone with his appearance. Next, the young man recalls the technological inventions created by his true friend in the past. The warrior remembers how the scientist conducted his scientific experiments with extreme dedication and care. Furthermore, Jin recalls that all ancient research always aimed to protect and help people. Wielding his weapon, the young man states that such evil behavior would never belong to his companion. Adjusting his glasses, the imposter calmly replies that he does not intend to solve anything through conversation either. Faced with the threat, Argus positions himself beside the warrior and states that he will face the master. Next, the captain admits that fighting the dark creature is beyond his reach. With blade in hand, Jin gathers energy beside the nobleman to begin combat. Ready for battle, the captain watches tensely while the young man concentrates all his power. Suddenly, the mutant monster appears beside Argus, leaving the captain completely shocked. Next, the opponent looks up as several energy blades appear all around. Reacting quickly to the attack, the creature focuses its glowing gaze to try to dodge the danger. However, Jin appears right behind his rival, stating that he fell into that simple trap. Without wasting time, the warrior fires a devastating cut of energy against the enemy's body. Next, the young man releases a potent blast that hurls a massive wave of energy. With that, the blades fall from the sky, causing a huge and violent explosion in the arena. While the massive impact happens, Jin remains steadfast, observing the result of that lightning attack. Right after, a dense curtain of smoke spreads, completely covering the entire place. Suddenly, several dark tentacles emerge from the smoke, catching the young man by surprise. With no time to react, the warrior ends up trapped and squeezed tightly by those tentacles. Walking through the smoke, the enemy comments that he truly understood what was happening there. Next, the monster firmly states that the young man truly deserves to be the vessel. Still immobilized by the bindings, Jin mutters in surprise, as he was certain he had severed those limbs. With a wicked smile, the opponent declares that now is the moment to continue everything. Next, channeling a vast amount of energy, the villain demands that the warrior entertain him. With a provocative smile, the villain declares that he wants to see how much fun the young man can give him. Still held by the restraints, Jin watches his opponent while maintaining a deeply focused and attentive gaze. Then, the monster charges forward at high speed, declaring that he will attack the young man without hesitation. With great agility, the young man grips his sword and firmly blocks that powerful attack. Upon observing his opponent, Jin tells himself that he had severed that limb just a few moments ago. Then the young man asks himself in surprise if the creature regenerated in such a short space of time. While wielding his blade, the young man analyzes the current situation, maintaining a very watchful posture. Jin remembers that his blade was made with nanomachines to prevent the monster's regeneration. Despite this, the dreadful creature charges swiftly toward him, maintaining a very aggressive look. Faced with this scene, the monster's severed limb begins to regenerate with extreme speed. With a very swift leap, the creature advances through the air, trying to strike the young warrior directly. Grabbing his foot in midair, the monster comments with a smile that Jin is quite fast. Squeezing the young man's leg, the villain adds that it is to be expected from the king's vessel. At that moment, a very intense dark energy begins to spread over the young man's body. In the middle of combat, Jin realizes that the regeneration speed surpasses the weapon's inhibition. Blocking the enemy's attack, the young man concludes that merely cutting him with the sword will not be enough. He thinks about launching a devastating attack, but recognizes that the underground space prevents it. Seizing the moment, the beast charges forward laughing and asks if that was all he had. Unfazed, Jin keeps his eyes sharp and focused while planning his next move. Then the warrior moves at blinding speed to trade swift blows with his opponent. With a precise movement, the young man extends his hand to activate his teleportation power. Quickly, Jin grabs the monster's head while concentrating an intense surge of electrical energy. Holding the beast firmly, the young man coldly orders the enemy not to move. Instantly, the glow of the nanomachines envelops them both to teleport them to another location. In the blink of an eye, the two reappear in the center center of a massive open chamber. Furious at being immobilized, the monster curses the warrior, asking what he just did. With a cold glare, Jin simply replies that he has no reason to give explanations. Next, the young man discharges a devastating shock that makes the creature scream in pain. Releasing the defeated opponent onto the ground, the young man turns his attention back to the scientist. Walking commandingly with his sword in hand, Jin declares that Kagura will now answer all his questions. Faced with the warrior's declaration, Kagura merely wears a small, smirk-filled smile on his face. Then, the scientist asks if it isn't too early to declare absolute victory. At that moment, an intense dark aura manifests once again around the defeated monster. Looking back, Jin realizes in shock that the head is not the controlling part of that body. The young man then concludes that the enemy's true core is located in its chest. Enraged, the creature declares its desire to kill the young man after suffering such humiliation. Intervening in the fight, Kagura warns that today's clash must end right there, immediately. Questioned by the monster, the scientist points behind him, telling him to look at the device. He explains that the young man only pretended to attack his rival to completely destroy that machine. With the device destroyed, the creature concludes there is no longer any reason to stay there. Glancing sideways, Kagura states that in its current state, the monster could never defeat Jin. He then adds that it would be problematic if the future king's vessel were to be damaged. Pointing his sword, Jin asks in surprise what he means by the term king. With a dark smile, Kagura calmly replies that he refers to the king of the corruptors themselves. Hearing that terrible revelation, the warrior remains silent, keeping a completely serious expression. Waving from afar, Kagura warns that they will return as soon as all preparations are complete. Fallen to his knees, Argus tries to stop their escape, telling them to wait a moment. Deeply outraged, the captain demands to know immediately what they did to the Grand Master. Stepping into the portal, Kagura replies with a smile that they will discover the whole truth in time. Before vanishing completely, the scientist bids farewell, promising to meet the young man next time. In absolute silence, Jin watches them disappear, while the fallen captain calls out for them to wait. As the portal closes, the light fades away, and Argus laments their escape. When asked about the villain's plans, Jin calmly admits that he has no answer. Looking at the young man, the captain asks where he is going and suggests investigating the area. Glancing sideways, the warrior silently turns around before continuing on his way. As he walks alone, the young man acknowledges that the teleportation ended up draining almost all his energy. Jin ponders that he would have been defeated if the battle had continued, and Kagura knew it. Next, the warrior stops in front of the laboratory's dark door to try to access the system. Instantly, the panel recognizes the young man's ultimate authority and begins the reboot process. Entering the control room, Jin looks at the monitors and questions the system's warning. Operating the terminal, Jin types in the commands to try to access the messaging system. Soon, the panel warns that without ultimate authorization, the message cube cannot open. Holding the luminous object, the young man senses what truly happened in that distant past. Then, Kagura's projection appears on the screen to play a crucial recording. In the recording, the scientist asks which facility his friend has just arrived at. Next, Kagura enthusiastically asks how Jin is feeling in this new world of the future. The scientist adds in the recording that it is time to reveal what is truly going on. Grimly, the man reveals in the message that he was transforming into a terrible corrupter. The narration explains that the issue arose in his old age with the dormant evil inside his body. On screen, the scientist's hand appears fully afflicted by the severe and dangerous mutant syndrome. Dejected, he admits in the recording that he was already prepared to face the worst outcome. The man shares that he managed to contain the disease with medication until his aging progressed. With gleaming eyes, Kagura reveals in the message that, surprisingly, he didn't end up dying back then. Instead of suffering, he explains that he felt his body rejuvenating through regenerative energy. Finally, the scientist declares that he fully assimilated with the mutant creature's cells. In the recording, Kagura explains that he adapted to the cells just as Jin adapted to the nanomachines. The scientist regrets that it would have been great if it stopped there, but unfortunately, it didn't end that way. Then, Kagura reports in the message that his own mind gradually began to be corrupted. He shares that he started hearing a mysterious voice constantly echoing inside his head. The voice commanded him to turn all existing life into corruptors, claiming it to be his true mission. With that, the scientist felt his thoughts being devoured as he lost control of himself. Facing the danger, Kagura explains that he took some precautions before losing control completely. In the recording, the scientist reveals that he transferred all his authority directly to the warrior. Next, Kagura sincerely asks Jin to act if he is no longer the same person. Staring intently into the projection, the scientist firmly begs Jin to stop him completely. With a faint smile on his face, he reinforces the plea, begging for that crucial help. As the projection vanishes into thin air, Jin holds the luminous cube, deeply focused and thoughtful. Looking at the small artifact in his hands, the warrior absorbs the full weight of that message. With a determined look, Jin replies in a quiet voice that he understood his friend's plea. Then, the warrior turns his back and walks forward with resolve, knowing that the journey will continue. With that, Jin walks toward the illuminated exit, leaving that ancient laboratory behind. Outside, Argus and the children reflect that there will be many sacrifices along the way. Riding ahead of everyone, Jin solemnly vows that he will stop his former friend. With a focused gaze, he adds that he won't do it solely for his friend's sake. Suddenly, Hakama points ahead, calling out enthusiastically that they are finally arriving. Before the open gates, the children wave joyfully, welcoming the group riding up to them. Watching the young ones smile, Jin concludes that he will also fight for the sake of this new world.